Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo can't control his Espada power and unleashed his full power? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the BaltasaraDutra for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Hollows. They never stop, blinded by lust and hunger that replaces any emotion they once felt as a human. They're only stopped by the action of splitting them in two, thus completely annihilating their whole body. The thoughts drifted through Ichigo Kurosaki's mind. He shot up from his bed, the sound of his combat pass indicating that a hollow had appeared. Moving swiftly into action, Ichigo pressed the combat pass to his body, separating his Soul Reaper self from his body. Launching himself out his window, he made his way towards the Howling Hollow. More trash, his hollow sighed. Don't they get the end point yet? Could be useful though if one of these suckers take you down, maybe. Ichigo tuned out of his hollow's rambling and focused on the hollow that was currently tearing up one of Katakura Town's parks. Although the hollow had basically the same looks and spiritual pressure as the others, Ichigo felt that something was off. It was there, hanging in the back of his mind, but he couldn't quite place what it was. Ignoring it, Ichigo engaged the hollow, distracting it from the soul of a young girl it had been chasing. The girl was crying, the chain of fate gleaming in the moonlight as it hung from the front of her chest, protecting her emotions from fading away. As it brought down one of its dull-born pincers, Ichigo promptly sliced it off with one big sweep of Zangetsu blade. He then shunpoed in front of the hollow's face and brought Zangetsu down the middle, splitting it in two, all before the pincer hit the floor, disintegrating as it did. Why hasn't Rukia shown up? She normally does, just to complain about how recklessly go into battle. She hasn't been around that much lately. Maybe something's wrong at the Soul Society. Dismissing the stupid idea, Ichigo turned his attention to the spirit that was standing at the edge of the park. She didn't look scared or surprised, which rose suspicion within Ichigo. Ichigo. This spirit is different, she's Zangetsu stopped cutting off anything he was just about to say. Ichigo had no idea what was going on. Zangetsu never had any difficulty talking to him, and unfortunately the same went for his hollow. A spike of spiritual pressure drew his attention to where the spirit was. The pressure was twisted, and it almost smothered him with the hatred that it emitted. Looking for the source, it turned out to be the spirit, or what had looked like a spirit. What the hell is that supposed to be? It still had the simple form of a normal spirit, but it kept fluctuating into something that looked like an ogre. The female ogre was taller than its spirit disguise and had burnt red skin that stretched over its twisted, muscly form that was clad in a loose brown robe with leather straps running down the arms. The sword encased on her hip was barely visible next to the dark robe. The only indication that it was there was the silver ribbon attached to the hilt, which would occasionally catch the light. Fierce tusks protruded from both the top and bottom jaw of the mouth, glinting menacingly. The whole of its face was pulled into bestial anger that never faltered, making Ichigo think it was a hollow, just one that lacked the white mask. The final touch was the jet black hair that tumbled down in a curly mess from its stubby white horns to its waist. Without thinking, Ichigo launched himself and Zangetsu at the creature, only to be stopped by its bare hand and then punched in the face with the other. The creature laughed as Ichigo was sent flying into the only structure of swings in the park, and it collapsed upon him. Trying again, Ichigo repeatedly shunpoed around the creature, performing multiple attacks, but they were all blocked as quickly as he could execute them. Breathing heavily, Ichigo landed a few feet away from his target. Is that all you got, Soul Reaper? The low voice echoed around the demolished park, dragging out as it snarled. Soul Reaper. Damn, how can it just stand there? I didn't want to use my Bankai, but it looks like I'll have to. I'm just getting started, Ichigo called as he widened his stance and wrapped the cloth from his shuriken around his arm. Bankai. Cutting through the dust the transformation had kicked up, Ichigo looked up at the strange hollow, Tensai Zangetsu. Oh, I say, it sounded like it was smirking, but its face was still frozen in its state of anger. How impressive. I have to finish this soon. Don't want it dragging out longer than necessary with this punk. Gathering spiritual pressure around his blade, Ichigo charged at the creature, which simply stared at him, laughter dancing in its eyes as it brought out its own blade. The blade was a sunburst black and red color. It was long and thin, with both sides covered in jagged edges that seemed to absorb any light around it. Ichigo awoke to the feeling of someone poking him. Expecting his maniacal dad to crash into his room on the attack, Ichigo quickly jumped up. Instead of his old man flying at him, there was a collective gasp around him. He looked up to see the souls of the Rukongai who had encircled him now slowly backing away, fear in their eyes. I don't get it. Why are they sacred of me? But something feels wrong, I can't dash. Ichigo, do you not remember? He doesn't. Well, this will be interesting as Zangetsu. What are you on about? and what am I supposed to be remembering? Do you remember the hollow from yesterday? Hollow, yeah, but what's dash? Ichigo was unable to continue talking with Zangetsu as rocks had started to be thrown at him by a few of the local children. They didn't throw very hard, but that wasn't the point to Ichigo. Why are they throwing rocks, god damn it? Hey! Quit throwing the rocks! As soon as he said it, Ichigo found the reason they were. His voice sounded like he was in hollowification, which would obviously frighten the souls which hollows preyed on. Why the hell am I hollowified? Damn it, Zangetsu, you know anything? It must have happened in your fight, but I feel something is missing, Ichigo, so you should remove it. There was no input from his hollow, which he was thankful for, as the bastard got on his nerves, but it made him think about what Zangetsu had just said. Bringing his hand up to his face, Ichigo attempted to remove his mask. An attempt that all but failed, as he only managed to remove the half on the left side of his face. This isn't good. Does this mean he's gaining control again? I thought I locked him away when I trained with the wizards. All around him, people from the Rukongai were staring at him, clearly distressed as they slowly started backing away, afraid he would consume them at any minute. Sighing, Ichigo slowly got up so he didn't scare them so much that they would run off and alert the seireitei if they hadn't already. The hope that they hadn't already was diminished when Ichigo saw a Shinigami casually walking down the road, but they weren't yet aware of Ichigo. Seeing the start of a forest, Ichigo scooped Zangetsu of the floor and quickly shunpoed behind the row of thick bushes, ducking down, while he suppressed his Ryatsu as much as he could. Even with his awful ability to control his spiritual pressure, the Shinigami must have been of a low level, as he failed to detect Ichigo at all. After the Shinigami had gone, Ichigo walked further into the forest in order to put distance between him and any other living thing. The forest was dark thanks to the canopy blocking out the sun, and after a while Ichigo couldn't tell how long he had been walking for. It was quiet in the forest, which made Ichigo glad. He didn't want to stumble across anyone or anything before he figured out what was going on with his hollow powers. It was dark, an eerie silence set through the forest that seemed to be getting more familiar to Ichigo as he continued to walk. Something was making Ichigo feel uncomfortable. It wasn't the type of uncomfortable that you felt when you thought someone was watching you. No, Ichigo felt that something was missing, but he couldn't quite grasp it, like it was right in front of him, but he failed to see it. He thought about his sisters back at home stuck with the old man, but he felt no emotion pass through him. Now that he thought about it, he had felt no emotion since waking up, not even when he saw the terror he had caused to the souls of the Rukongai. All he could feel in place of any emotion was a cold emptiness where his soul chain would have been. He remembered what Zangetsu had said before about something being missing and now realized what he meant. Before he could elaborate on the point, a harsh, cold, fiery pain coursed up his right arm, making his world spin. He stumbled forwards a few steps, but in the end he collapsed in front of a tree that was on the edge of a huge clearing. All Ichigo could do was sit there as his arm felt like it was being ripped apart and put back together piece by piece. Flesh and bone burned as the pain grew in intensity, but the only sound that escaped Ichigo was a soft hiss as he was pulled into the darkness with his left hand clutching Zangetsu by his side. Little did Ichigo know was that his right arm had begun its change. An icy whiteness crawled its way up. Echoes of his battle with Ulquiorra reverberated through the air as the sleeve of his shahakusho faded, overcome by the violent nature of his inner hollow. It was like his hollow was trying to make a statement that he couldn't be suppressed for much longer. Swords clashed. Flesh was sliced. Blood soiled the floor. Screams echoed everywhere. Explosions sounded through the area. Green and black clashed with red and white in a violent attempt to annihilate each other from the world. It ended after an overpowering redness consumed everything. The screams didn't stop, but it didn't matter, they were incoherent. The only thing that could be heard was, "I will save you." Ichigo was flinching as he remained out cold, Ryatsu fluctuating with each movement. Students had gathered around him, whispering at the sight of him. "What is it?" "It's a hollow, isn't that obvious? But it has a Zanpakuto, so Then it's an Arankar. Maybe we should go get someone to deal with it?" "Yeah, that's a good idea, it looks powerful. I can hardly stand with its Ryatsu like this. It's smothering me. Look, there's a fifth year, maybe then can do something." "Hey, Tsukimi *senpai, look what we found." Akira wasn't the most model student, but he was smart, and those who were younger than him looked to him when they were in trouble. Clad in the standard blue academy uniform, he was around the same height as Ichigo, but still looked young in age. His hair was a deep auburn, and the tips just reached his shoulders as it fell evenly down each side of his face. He turned to see who had called him. A smile spread across his face as he saw who it was. "Kasumi *chan, I thought I told you to call me Akira-chan or Akira *senpai if it makes you feel better. We have been friends for over 4 years now." He smiled at her, which caused Kasumi's pale cheeks to tinge pink. "But it's rude, Tsukimi-senpai, anyway, that's not important now," Kasumi said as Akira raised an eyebrow. What's important is this Shinigami or hollow whatever his is lying right on the academy grounds. She indicated to where Ichigo lay still flinching, but something was different now. Thin mist was now surrounding him as a shape in it started to form. Gasps washed over those watching him as the mist started to clear. His Zanpakuto had vanished, and in its place was a tall figure wearing a long black coat. The figure bent down and started violently shaking the orange-haired boy. "Hey, stop!" Kasumi started, but Akira cut her off. "That's his Zanpakuto. It would be wise to send someone to go get a teacher if someone hasn't gone already." "God damn it, Zangetsu, what have I told you about doing that when you materialize? Bad enough that stupid hollow does it when I come visit you guys, but in the real world is enough." A voice yelled, cutting through the chatter that had erupted after the smoke vanished. Silence fell over the ground where they all stood, but the orange head didn't seem to notice as he continued to rant at his Zanpakuto. "Now why are you out here? Didn't I just speed the whole of the night in my inner world?" Unless he trailed off thinking about that dream he'd had about defeating Ukiura. "Ichigo, we have matters that need discussing and I need all parties to be here. The hollow shall be here soon, but he requests we call him Shiro." Zangetsu held his hand up to prevent Ichigo's interruption. "I do not know why, but if you look at your arm you will know why this cannot wait." Ichigo did as Zangetsu instructed, and shock pierced his features when he took in what had happened to his arm. It was completely white and cold to the touch. Around his wrist was some red fur. There was a stark contrast to the icy appearance of his arm. "What happened? I'm turning into a hollow? But how?" Questions poured out of Ichigo's mouth as he became more worried about his inner hollow. He was soon cut off by a familiar voice he had no desire to hear. "Ichigo. So nice to see ya, especially the way you're looking right now." His inner hollow was stood next to Zangetsu, a huge smirk on his face, apparently happy he was outside. The hollow looked the same as he normally did, the exact opposite of Ichigo, except today they had one similarity, and that was his arm. It too was white with the tuft of red fur encircling his wrist, but there was also a hole in his chest that Ichigo had never noticed before, unless it wasn't there in the first place. "Hollow. I mean Shiro, what do you want?" Ichigo attempted to be as pleasant as possible with Shiro, but the hollow saw right through it. "Save the pleasantries for another time, Ichigo, will ya? Right now we got a big problem to deal with." The high, icy voice echoed round the clearing as Shiro spoke. "As much as I want to take over your body, I'd rather do it in my own way. Not with the help of some piece of shit that I could easily crush. So what exactly happened to make this happen?" Pushing the feeling of disgust his hollow always brought out of him, Ichigo looked up at the hollow, meeting his black and gold-eyed gaze. "Did you get hit on the head or something? You were fighting that Oni bitch, but she pulled a fast one on ya and stole at least 3/4 of your soul. Would have taken the whole pitiful thing had I not intervened." The smug look on Shiro's face was enough to piss off Ichigo. Save his soul or not, Ichigo would not feel grateful to this bastard. Summoning up as much will as he could, Ichigo attempted to force him back into their inner world. "Fine, you saved me, but I'll deal with this now. Get back to where you're supposed to be. Hiding me away will sheer willpower? If you don't pull it together, I will take over and it will stay that way. I won't stay locked away like a good boy for much longer, King." With one last movement, to damn hollow proceeded to kick Ichigo into a tree, and not expecting it, Ichigo went flying back into the tree behind him. Zangetsu stared down at him, his mouth twitching like he was about to laugh. Ichigo scowled at him. "Okay, old man, tell me what happens now." "Ichigo, you don't have long. I can only hold Shiro back for so long to slow down the takeover. There is still about 1/4 of your soul left, but the Oni's spell is still there. Pieces of your soul are being removed, and I'm sure you've noticed the lack on emotion you've been feeling apart from negative ones that a hollow would feel." Zangetsu gazed at Ichigo, his cloak flapping in the non-existent wind. "I would suggest that you attempt to track down this Oni and find out why she targeted you and for what purpose. Before that you have another issue to see to, and I believe it won't wait much longer. Good luck, Ichigo." With that vague goodbye, Zangetsu turned back into a sword just in time for someone to yell at Ichigo. Zanpakuto drawn. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The person was an old man whose spiritual pressure was smothered significantly by Ichigo's. It was then that Ichigo realized that his whole conversation had been overheard by at least 10 students, all dressed in what Ichigo guessed was the Shinigami Academy Shihakushos. "Do I need to answer that?" "I'm just leaving." Ichigo started to turn around when he heard multiple voices call out from behind. "Bakudo 9. Horin!" Ichigo managed to dodge a few, but one caught him on the foot, while another caught his chest and pulled him back onto another tree. The force of Ichigo hitting the tree reverberated through it, causing the few reaming leaves to fall to the ground. Another voice spoke to him. This one was younger, but the spiritual pressure behind it was better than that of the old man's. "I would advise you do as Sensei said, as I doubt you would survive 10 Kido assaults." "Damn Soul Society. I can't even use Kido." Any suggestions would be welcome, guys. Go Bankia and kill all the heirs? Ichigo rolled his eyes. Helpful Shiro. You could try it, Ichigo. The going Bankai, not killing them all. I'm not really comfortable going Bankai. I might crush them with my spiritual pressure. Well, if you weren't so shit at controlling your Ryatsu, you could send a bunch of it to a weak point on the Kido. I think I can do that. You two know where the weak point is. Well, when I say weak, I mean only a little bit unstable, but you can try. If it fails, go Bankai, or I'll make you. I can control that hollow-fied arm at times, you know, King. The weak points on your hollow arm. Attempting the suggestion, Ichigo focused his spiritual pressure on his hollow arm where the Kido crossed it. He could sense the weakness in the Kido and he exploited it. It started cracking soon as it required little pressure to break it, but as it broke, another binding spell was fired. It seemed stronger than the one he just broken, and Ichigo had no time to shunpo away. True to his word, Shiro used his arm and initiated Bankai, dissipating the incoming Kido. The hollow arm was still visible even with the Bankai, as the sleeve, instead of not being there, was white like Shiro's Bankai had been when he trained for the final Getsuga Tensho. Lifting his hand to his face, Ichigo felt for his mask, which was still there, covering half of his face. There was another hollow addition to his body, which was the extremely long orange hair that fell to the middle of his back. Before Ichigo could catch his breath, more Kidos were fired at him, but he dodged them all with ease. All the time, anger built up inside of him, triggered by the fact they immediately condemned him because he was turning hollow. It was understandable, and on any normal day Ichigo would have tried to avoid a fight, but all rationality had left Ichigo along with the pieces of his soul that had been stolen. His Ryatsu flared up as his anger built, and the quantity of Kidos started to diminish. Their wielders were too busy being crushed by his spiritual pressure. Looking down, Ichigo observed those on the floor, and satisfied that they could no longer attack him, he descended to the ground and exited his Bankai state. Wanting to know anything he could about an Oni, he walked over to the guy that had the highest spiritual pressure. He was breathing heavily as he flopped back into a sitting position, sweat building on his forehead like he'd just been through a mass workout. He looked up at Ichigo, half a smirk creeping onto his face, and amusement dancing in his warm blue eyes. Do you know what an Oni is? Ichigo demanding, his rage still simmering beneath the surface. At least he knew what it was like to be a hollow. A nod was all he got, so Ichigo relaxed some of his Ryatsu so that he could speak. I don't know much, cause they're meant to be extinct, but we're still taught about them. The name's Akira Tsukimi, by the way. I attempted a grin, but my current state wouldn't allow it. Okay then, Akira-san, tell me what you know. In the world of the living, Orihime, Ishida, Chad, and Ichigo's other friends weren't extremely worried about Ichigo's sudden disappearance. They'd all assumed he'd gone to see Rukia in the seireitei, and Khan had failed to remember his message. The only thing that bothered them was the fact that he hadn't told them he was going, as they all wanted to see Rukia too. When do you think Kurosaki-kun will be back? Orihime asked Ishida as they all sat on the roof eating lunch. If my guess is right, he should be back today, as he never leaves the world of the living for too long. Ishida sighed. It's as if he believes me incapable of dealing with the local hollows. I'm sure he doesn't mean it like that, Ishida-kun. I hope he comes back soon. That strange spiritual pressure the other night keeps bugging me. Orihime trailed off into thought, and soon went into her usual daydreaming state. Noticing this, Ishida and everyone else soon got back to their lunch, musing over what Orihime said, among other things such as their schoolwork. The school day had finished, and Ishida had decided to visit the place where he'd last sensed Ichigo's spiritual pressure. The park was deserted, which was unusual, as children normally played in this area after school. He wandered around the whole area of the park, picking up traces of Ichigo's Ryatsu among others, including 2 hollows and one that he couldn't identify. He vaguely recognized one of the hollows and shivered as he remembered when he'd first met it. He'd never forget how wild Kurosaki had been. They'd all be dead had Ulquiorra not intervened when he did. The other hollow Ryatsu was just your everyday garden variety hollow. Now the only thing left was to find out what the third trace of Ryatsu was. As much as he didn't want to, Ishida decided to go see the mental ex-captain Urahara about his findings, back in the Soul Society in some random forest. Come on, Kasumi! We've only got 30 minutes to get to the Squad 13 barracks. Akira called out behind him as he shunpoed through the forest carrying Ichigo, who was still out cold. It's not my fault. You know I can't shunpa as fast as you and Sensei. Kasumi yelled breathlessly as her unhelpful friend. Their Kido teacher Tetsuya simply shook his head at the ranting youngsters and continued leading the way to the seireitei. He himself was still questioning why he even let them drag the hollow-fied substitute all the way to the seireitei in the first place. 15 minutes later, the edge of the seireitei, Ichigo's condition had worsened. One arm was completely hollow-fied, as was the top half of his chest, while the other was slowly moving that way. Black tattoos spread out from the place where a hole was still in formation on his chest, dragging backwards over his shoulders in 6 separate lines. The only piece of his shahakusho that was left was the legs, but soon that would be gone too, replaced by the monster that could destroy the Soul Society. Ah, there's the entrance. Let's go guys, time's a ticking. Akira practically bounced towards the entrance of the seireitei. Who would have guessed the holification brought such happiness to him? Surely they're not going to just let us wander in with a wizard, Tetsuya said, receiving glances from his students. Is that what he's called? They never taught that at the academy. Kasumi pondered as they caught up with Akira, who was currently arguing with a confused guard of Soul Reapers. The guard consisted of 5 Shinigami who stood on the outside one of the main entrances to the seireitei, who of which didn't want to be dealing with a lost academy student. That was before they saw Ichigo. You bring a hollow into the court of Pure cells. One of the guards stressed the word pure. But he's not a hollow. Look! Akira dropped Ichigo onto the floor so that the guards could now see that he was indeed a Soul Reaper. Show them his sword, sensei. Tetsuya pulled the giant cleaver off his back as he stood above the sorry state of a wizard. That's Kurosaki Ichigo's blade, they said in unison. Glancing at the boy on the floor, they realized who it must be and simply stood there lost for words. I suggest, gentlemen, that you go get Captain Yukitake of the 13th Division for us. Tell him it's an emergency concerning Kurosaki Ichigo. Tetsuya ordered them, and when they did move, he politely added, Go. Now. Or shall I tell your captains that you put the Soul Society at risk? Soon enough, one of the guards called a hell butterfly and sent the message to Captain Yukitake as well as the head captain. They saw no problem in informing the head captain about all of this. Urahara's shop. The world of the living. Rukia, what are you doing here? I thought Kurosaki went to see you. Ishida was stood in the entrance of Urahara's shop when he saw Rukia walking in from the back with Urahara. No, he hasn't. Why'd you ask? Confusion swept across her features. Oh. It's just his spiritual pressure vanished the other day, and no one's seen him since, so we thought he came to see you. I see. Well, I've received reports of strange Ryatsu in the area, so I came to investigate. Has he used your senkumin, Urahara? She looked at the shopkeeper, who currently had his fan brought up to his mouth, thinking. Nope, I take it you've been tracking his Ryatsu, Ishida-san? Urahara quizzed as he flapped his stupid green fan, nodding yes, but I found trances I couldn't detect, so. Ishida was cut off when a hell butterfly appeared fluttering next to Rukia as it landed on her hand. Bringing it up to her face to recover the message, Ichigo Rukia froze up her face in complete shock as she took in the message from the hell butterfly. It couldn't be happening, could it? His hollow was supposed to be dormant, and only active when he used the creepy mask. What is it, Rukia? Both Urahara and Ishida asked. Ichigo was found today at the Shinigami Academy. She paused, almost unable to continue. He's become a hollow. In the world of the living, Orihime, Ishida, Chad and Ichigo's other friends weren't extremely worried about Ichigo's sudden disappearance. They'd all assumed he'd gone to see Rukia in the seireitei, and Khan had failed to remember his message. The only thing that bothered them was the fact that he hadn't told them he was going, as they all wanted to see Rukia too. When do you think Kurosaki-kun will be back? Orihime asked Ishida as they all sat on the roof eating lunch. If my guess is right, he should be back today, as he never leaves the world of the living for too long. Ishida sighed. It's as if he believes me incapable of dealing with the local hollows. I'm sure he doesn't mean it like that, Ishida-kun. I hope he comes back soon. That strange spiritual pressure the other night keeps bugging me. Orihime trailed off into thought, and soon went into her usual daydreaming state. Noticing this, Ishida and everyone else soon got back to their lunch, musing over what Orihime said, among other things such as their schoolwork. The school day had finished, and Ishida had decided to visit the place where he'd last sensed Ichigo's spiritual pressure. The park was deserted, which was unusual, as children normally played in this area after school. He wandered around the whole area of the park, picking up traces of Ichigo's Ryatsu among others, including 2 hollows and one that he couldn't identify. He vaguely recognized one of the hollows and shivered as he remembered when he'd first met it. He'd never forget how wild Kurosaki had been. They'd all be dead had Ulquiorra not intervened when he did. The other hollow Ryatsu was just your everyday garden variety hollow. Now the only thing left was to find out what the third trace of Ryatsu was. As much as he didn't want to, Ishida decided to go see the mental ex-captain Urahara about his findings, back in the Soul Society in some random forest. Come on, Kasumi! We've only got 30 minutes to get to the Squad 13 barracks. Akira called out behind him as he shunpoed through the forest carrying Ichigo, who was still out cold. It's not my fault. You know I can't shunpa as fast as you and sensei. Kasumi yelled breathlessly as her unhelpful friend. Their Kido teacher Tetsuya simply shook his head at the ranting youngsters and continued leading the way to the seireitei. He himself was still questioning why he even let them drag the hollowified substitute all the way to the seireitei in the first place. 15 minutes later, the edge of the seireitei, Ichigo's condition had worsened. One arm was completely hollowified, as was the top half of his chest, while the other was slowly moving that way. Black tattoos spread out from the place where a hole was still in formation on his chest, dragging backwards over his shoulders in 6 separate lines. The only piece of his shahakusho that was left was the legs, but soon that would be gone too, replaced by the monster that could destroy the Soul Society. Ah, there's the entrance. Let's go, guys, time's a ticking. Akira practically bounced towards the entrance of the seireitei. Who would have guessed the hollowification brought such happiness to him? Surely they're not going to just let us wander in with a wizard, Tetsuya said, receiving glances from his students. Is that what he's called? They never taught that at the academy. Kasumi pondered as they caught up with Akira, who was currently arguing with a confused guard of Soul Reapers. The guard consisted of 5 Shinigami who stood on the outside one of the main entrances to the seireitei, who of which didn't want to be dealing with a lost academy student. That was before they saw Ichigo. You bring a hollow into the court of pure cells. One of the guards stressed the word pure. But he's not a hollow. Look! Akira dropped Ichigo onto the floor so that the guards could now see that he was indeed a Soul Reaper. Show them his sword, sensei. Tetsuya pulled the giant cleaver off his back as he stood above the sorry state of a wizard. That's Kurosaki Ichigo's blade, they said in unison. Glancing at the boy on the floor, they realized who it must be and simply stood there lost for words. I suggest, gentlemen, that you go get Captain Yukitake of the 13th Division for us. Tell him it's an emergency concerning Kurosaki Ichigo. Tetsuya ordered them, and when they did move, he politely added, Go. Now. Or shall I tell your captains that you put the Soul Society at risk? Soon enough, one of the guards called a hell butterfly and sent the message to Captain Yukitake as well as the head captain. They saw no problem in informing the head captain about all of this. Urahara's shop. The world of the living. Rukia, what are you doing here? I thought Kurosaki went to see you. Ishida was stood in the entrance of Urahara's shop when he saw Rukia walking in from the back with Urahara. No, he hasn't. Why'd you ask? Confusion swept across her features. Oh. It's just his spiritual pressure vanished the other day, and no one's seen him since, so we thought he came to see you. I see. Well, I've received reports of strange Ryatsu in the area, so I came to investigate. Has he used your senkumin, Urahara? She looked at the shopkeeper, who currently had his fan brought up to his mouth, thinking. Nope, I take it you've been tracking his Ryatsu, Ishida-san? Urahara quizzed as he flapped his stupid green fan. Nodding yes, but I found trances I couldn't detect, so. Ishida was cut off when a hell butterfly appeared fluttering next to Rukia as it landed on her hand. Bringing it up to her face to recover the message, Rukia froze up her face in complete shock as she took in the message from the hell butterfly. It couldn't be happening, could it? His hollow was supposed to be dormant, and only active when he used the creepy mask. What is it, Rukia? Both Urahara and Ishida asked. Ichigo was found today at the Shinigami Academy. She paused, almost unable to continue. He's become a hollow. Tetsuya and his students had been told to head towards Squad 13 barracks by the gate guard. They'd been told that Captain Yukitake was too ill to come down to the gate but had said to bring Kurosaki Ichigo to him. Dreading what would happen on their way there, Tetsuya, Akira and Kasumi reluctantly made their way in the direction of Squad 13 barracks. Just entering the seireitei, Ichigo couldn't yet open his eyes. His body was in pain. Blackness was all around him. The only thing that told him he was conscious was the voices of those around him. Why is there a hollow in the seireitei? Who let it in? Do you think it's dead? Those guys are carrying it after all. Hey, look at his hair. Doesn't that look like? The voices faded as if someone had put cotton wool in his ears. Ichigo soon fell back into the depths of his mind as the pain became too much. Just passing through Squad 11. Waking up again, Ichigo's eyebrow twitched as he heard the familiar rowdy voices of Squad 11. His head felt like it had been used as a punch bag and the rest of his body felt numb. What's with the academy students? You students don't belong here. We of Squad 11 shall teach you a lesson. The overconfident nature of Squad 11 was starting to piss Ichigo off. He knew they were having a go at the students he'd met at the academy as he could feel their spiritual pressure. He was in no mood to put up with them. The sooner they got to Yukitake the better, and these guys were getting in the way. Want me to take care of them, King? Shiro's shrill voice reached Ichigo louder than normal. That would not be wise, Shiro. The wise Zanpakuto's voice was quieter than normal and Ichigo could barely hear him. Shiro-zan gets this right. Your taking over will only make it worse. I only want to talk to someone. Not slaughter everyone. Ichigo mentally rolled his eyes but still thankful. At least he knew he'd be thankful had circumstances been different. Suppose you're right, King. Shiro paused in confusion. What is going on? I'm becoming more like you. The horror of being a pathetic human is too much for this hollow. I'm off to destroy something. Keep an eye on him, Zangetsu. This newfound rationality could prove useful to the bastard. Indeed. Ichigo left the rest to Zangetsu, hoping he could help the hollow see the bright side of rationality. Please, sirs, we only want to get to Squad 13 barracks. Kasumi pleaded, bringing Ichigo back to the brainless brutes that were Squad 11. I don't give two shits, little girl, Cutting the dense Shinigami off as he removed himself from the shoulder of Akira, Ichigo yelled at the idiots, would you guys give it a rest? We don't have time to waste on you. Obviously Ichigo had forgotten he was currently turning hollow, so the reaction was not what he expected. Guys, it's a hollow. Kill it! One of them yelled as he charged towards Ichigo, flanked by the rest of his squad. And they cried, raising their zanpakutos as they charged. Quick, hand me Zangetsu. Ichigo took Zangetsu from Tetsuya and sent a very weak Getsuga Tensho at the horde of idiots. I think it's best we run. Ichigo shunpoed as fast as he could towards the spiritual pressure that belonged to Yukitake. The others could barely keep up with him, and by the time they arrived, Tetsuya, Akira and Kasumi were so exhausted they almost collapsed outside the barracks. The street outside the barracks was deserted. All they could see was the whiteness of the Seiki rocks stretching out before them, with the occasional path that would turn off. Ichigo looked up towards the gateway to Squad 13 that was too deserted. However, beyond the gate Ichigo could make out multiple Shinigami Ryatsu, and guessing they were having lunch, he continued on. As he did so, the others gave each other nervous glances as they knew that Squad 13 were training. Deciding it best not to stop him, as he had little more than 3 hours till he became a full hollow, they promptly followed him. Ichigo followed the Ryatsu of Captain Yukitake as he and the others walked through the barracks. When Ichigo reached a big training area, he saw Yukitake sitting on the wooden veranda of the main building from the squad barracks. He was sat behind the rest of his squad, who were currently watching Kaion and Sitaro as they demonstrated what exercise they would be doing. As quietly as he could, Ichigo crept towards Yukitake in hopes no one would notice him. Unfortunately, Kaion and Sitaro, who were both glancing towards the captain, saw Ichigo as he was creeping. Now, to other people, Ichigo looks more or less like a hollow now. His white chest and arms, a long mane of orange hair, a broken hollow mask on the side of his head, the hole and its markings that bring attention to it don't help matters. So when both Kaion and Sitaro see a hollow creeping towards their captain, they're going to try and stop it in any way possible. As quick as anyone's ever seen them move, they charged towards the unsuspecting Ichigo, who's now almost at Yukitake, while the rest of his group hung back. Captain is all Ichigo hears from the third seats before they crash into him and send him flying through the wall of the main building. Oh! What the hell are you guys doing? Ichigo jumps up and starts yelling at them. I only wanted to talk to Yukitake-san without interrupting, but then you decide to shove me through a wall. Ichigo looks at everyone as they stare at him. His temper's rising, and with it so does his Ryatsu, and soon enough all of the squad are gasping for air, as they crumple to the floor from the huge pressure. Climbing though the hole that was made, Ichigo comes face to face with Yukitake, who is also having noticeable effort with moving. Pain burns up his arm, cutting through his rage. Everyone else can now move, while Ichigo is left almost immobilized by the searing pain. Clutching his arm in pain, Ichigo doubles over as he tries to calm down. Not now! Zangetsu, can you postpone this so I can talk to Yukitake? I am trying, Ichigo, but it is becoming too much. The more it takes over your body, the easier you become angered. And before Zangetsu wouldn't have been so easily cut off by his hollow. But the Oni had messed with his powers too much, and there was now an imbalance between the two sides. The easier you become angered, the harder it is to quell the anger. I'll help you this once, King. I don't want to, but this is what happens when you become more rational and not just basic instinct. I'm not going to thank you, Shiro. Wasn't counting on it, King. The sneer from the hollow was evident even through thoughts. Ichigo, are you okay? Kasumi called as Akira and Tetsuya appeared from around the side of the building, concern evident in their eyes as well as fear of the monster he could become. Don't worry, they're holding it back right now. Ichigo patted his Zanpakuto as he gave them the best smile he could, reassuring them he wouldn't become a hollow. Ichigo? Is that really you? What has happened to you? Yukitake asked, his expression guarded, his hand resting on his Zanpakuto. As he spoke, the warning klaxon rang out across the seireitei. Ichigo's sweat dropped, realizing it was because of what happened only minutes ago. Yeah, I came here to talk to you about this, Yukitake-san. Looking around him, Ichigo noticed that the squad had drawn their swords, an expected reaction considering he was turning hollow. I would invite you to sit down, but I can sense Captain Kuchiki on his way here. No doubt he felt your reacts earlier. So quickly ask what it is you need to know. Yukite coughed a little as he finished, getting concerned glances from his squad who had now relaxed their stances around Ichigo. I need to know as much as you know about Oni. What are their abilities and who are they? Oni. I haven't heard that name in ages. From what I know, they're a race like hollows, only they keep their soul and can be rational. They take the souls from the living or dead, so technically they can feed off hollow. Unfortunately, they chose not to, and the Soul Society was forced to eliminate them like they did the Quincy's as few decades later. He paused, allowing Ichigo to take it in. As for their abilities, it depends on the Oni. Some Onis were once humans, so the only extra abilities they gain are speed or strength. As for the pure ones, well, it could range from anything as little as speed or as powerful as hollow, Shinigami, and their own powers making them nearly impossible to kill. They don't have the powers of a hollow or Shinigami, just those equal to them. But as I said, their own ability varies. The only one I knew was a psychological one that decreases the responsiveness of your limbs. Well, it makes you believe it has. I take it you fought against one, Yukite-san? Ichigo asked as he took in all this new information. How was he supposed to defeat them when they could be more powerful than a hollow and Shinigami combined? I'm not happy to admit it, but yes, I did. But I take it that this has something to do with your current state, Kurosaki-san. He indicated to the hole, the arm, and Ichigo's chest. Yeah, I was attacked by one, and well, I woke up with myself turning into a hollow. Ichigo turned to go. Thanks, Yukite-san, but at best I go now. Zangetsu and Shiro can only prevent it for so long. Akira-san, Kasumi-san, Tatsuya-san, stay here. I'm sure Yukite will get you back to the academy without being held responsible for me. Kurosaki, you shall not be going anywhere. And as for your friends, they shall be convicted of aiding a hollow against the Soul Society. Byakuya Kuchiki flash-stepped next to Yukite, and before Ichigo knew it, sent a high-level binding Kido at him. Bakudo number 63, Seijo Sabaku. Ichigo's arms became bound to his sides as a thick golden chain wrapped itself round him. And this time there were no weak points. I know now is not the right time, but we can no longer hold back the transformation from earlier. Byakuya! What the hell do you think you're doing? I have to go now. Ichigo roared, his voice distorted in a hollow way as pain sliced its way up his arm. Damn it. Looks like everyone's going to get front row seats to the freak show. It's not that exciting, King. I've been watching it happen the whole time, and it's me you're turning into. I'm sorry we didn't warn you about Byakuya, Ichigo. We were busy with the oncoming storm. Don't worry, Zangetsu. There's not much we can do now. Whatever Zangetsu had been planning to say was blocked out by the continuation of the transformation. It was worse than the first time. The burning and stripping of flesh wouldn't let him drop into unconsciousness. No, instead it made him stay awake as his arm was destroyed and remade in the image of his hollow. His hands too were stretched and molded into claws that could easily tear into flesh. Ichigo screamed and yelled as the transformation went on. He wanted it to end, but not even the emotion of disperse was available to the Soul Reaper anymore. The people around him became no more than a red haze as rage filled his vision. Ichigo tried to fight it, and it was obvious to those watching who simply stared at his in horror when they saw the remolding taking place firsthand. Even Byakuya was speechless as he watched the boy shake in pain, unable to move because of the Kido. So this is what he was talking about earlier. Captain Kuchiki, would you remove the Kido? I doubt he is much of a threat in his current state. Yukite asked. Simply nodding his head, the noble dispersed the Kido around the now ghost of a once great Soul Reaper. Nobody expected what happened next, which was both Ichigo's Zanpakuto and Hollow to materialize and grab Ichigo. The Hollow looked just like Ichigo, only in reversed colors. The arms and torso were both that of a how Ichigo looked. Its hair was long, but instead of orange it was a bright cruel white that also reached far down its back. To top it off, his vicious black and yellow eyes glared at the surrounding Shinigami, as a stark contrast to his pale skin. His Zanpakuto was the same as ever, the dark-clad old man with a pair on sunglasses. We suggest you do not follow Ichigo when he is like he is now. If you want to help him go southwest of the Soul Society, it should take 2 hours. Zangetsu said to the captains. Yeah, or just follow Ta Weird Ryatsu's signature southwest of the Shinigami Academy. Shiro sneered at them, his yellow eyes narrowing. Who are you? Byakuya indicated to the Hollow. TCH, you don't remember me kicking your ass on Tsukioka Hill? A evil grin made its way onto the Hollow's icy face. You! So you, Byakuya was cut off by Ichigo's mentor of a Zanpakuto. We do not have time for this. Shiro, grab Ichigo. I will carry my manifestation. TCH, still don't trust me, Zan. Shrio picked up Ichigo as Zangetsu grabbed the sword. While you have become rational, you still contain basic Hollow instinct. It's best we prevent it from rearing its head. stated Zangetsu before he flash-stepped away. Heh, see you around, captains. He turned to Ichigo's newfound helpers. You've been a great help to King, but don't go to fight the Oni is what he's wantin'. And with that the hollow vanished from the sight of the Shinigami, leaving them all confused. I think it's time for a captain's meeting, don't you, Captain Kuchiki? Yokotake asked. That boy always brings trouble with him, Byakuya said in his usual cold voice before using a hell butterfly to initiate a captain's meeting. It was raining. They always hated the rain. It meant only sadness and pain to the hollow and Zanpakuto. Even in materialization they couldn't escape it. Deciding they should stay outside and keep watch on Ichigo, even if it meant standing in the rain, at least they wouldn't be alone. Both of them silently settled down next to Ichigo on either side of the tree he'd been propped against. The rain continued to fall as they sat there waiting for Ichigo to awaken. He had now reached the halfway point of his transformation. The only things left to be hollowified were the legs and the mask on his face. Drips of rain made their way through the canopy, and eventually they were all soaked through, but the coldness it brought bothered none of them. The only thing that bothered the spirits was the sense of despair the rain brought with them. They were unsure that Ichigo would break the spell in time. The odds were against him, but it had always been that way, and he had always broken through the most unlikely situations. This time was different, though. Before it had been Ichigo's friends and family on the line, but this time it was Ichigo himself who was in the way of danger, and his self-sacrificing nature could ultimately be his downfall. Erg, Ichigo groaned as he stirred back into consciousness. Finally! Come on, Kingy, get up, you gotta hurry. Shiro jumped up, pulling Ichigo with him, and started shaking the half-awake Soul Reaper. I don't think that's a good idea, Shiro, Zangetsu warned. What the hell do you think you're doing? Ichigo attempted to yell at the hollow in a light-hearted way, but all emotion apart from hate and anger had left him. Acting quickly, Zangetsu appeared in front of Ichigo and pulled the hollow away before it caused more damage. Ichigo, remember who you are. Don't let these emotions control you or you'll lose everything you fought for, Zangetsu said in an attempt to quell the growing anger that would speed up the transformation. I'm okay, thanks, old man. We should go end this now, shouldn't we, before this gets any worse. The fight for control was evident on his face, but Ichigo didn't let the turmoil of emotions control him. Do you think the seireitei will send people to help? It is likely, as they would prefer to prevent your hollowification that could destroy the whole soul society. Yeah, but they wanted to eradicate the Oni just like they tried to before. And just like what they did with the Bounce and Quincy's. Shiro sneered. Are you sure you want their help, King? They're gonna wipe them all out. Do you know what that feels like, to be constantly hunted because you can't help what you are? I won't let that happen. There has to be another way. Ichigo vowed. We should go, maybe we can reason with them before the others get there. We cannot go yet, I have something we must do. It will only take a second and it will help slow down the hollowification. Zangetsu indicated for Ichigo to sit. We shall meditate, and by bringing our minds into synchronization we can act more effectively. In agreement, Ichigo and Shiro sat down on the waterlogged floor, and soon Zangetsu joined them as they all closed their eyes and started to meditate. 15 minutes later / We are ready, Ichigo, Shiro and I shall return to your mindscape now. At that both Shiro and Zangetsu dematerialized back into his mindscape. You better not fail, Kingy. If you do, then I'll be the one in control, and I've been wanting to try your friends for a while. Don't worry, Shiro, I won't fail. Meanwhile, in the Soul Society at a captain meeting, we have called this emergency captain meeting to discuss the action we should take concerning Kurosaki Ichigo and the reappearance of the Oni. Yamamoto informed the 9 captains and 3 lieutenants who were standing in for the squads who had yet to receive new captains. Oh, a new specimen. I wasn't around when the Oni appeared the first time. Maybe I can get some experiments done on them. Mariyuri Kurosatsuki grinned as he thought about the many experiments he could do on the Oni. Captain Kuchiki, I understand you encountered Kurosaki Ichigo earlier, Yamamoto said, ignoring Mariyuri. Kurosaki was in the 13th Division barracks when I caught up with him after I'd run into some Soul Reapers from the 11th Division who had been knocked out by a hollow with his abilities. Byakuya said, when I got there he was indeed a hollow as the Hell Butterfly had reported earlier, but he still had his rationality. It seemed to me that he was still in the process of becoming a full hollow. Almost half of his body had been hollowified when I got there, and I believe by now he has reached the halfway point in his transformation. Although the transformation seems to be a slow and painful one, I believe that the rate of it depends on his emotional state. If he is angered, then it speeds up, and if he is otherwise, I would say it is normal. Fascinating. I would love to make him one of my test subjects when this is over. Mariyuri said, excitement evident on his face. Kurosaki Ichigo is not to become a test subject, as he is to be destroyed if he becomes a treat to the Soul Society. Captain Kuchiki continued. Yamamoto said, wanting this meeting to be over as soon as possible. After the transformation had finished, Kurosaki proceeded to faint, which is understandable. When this happened, his Zanpakuto and inner hollow materialized. Mummers echoed round the room. They both gave the warning about the Oni and even gave directions to the hideout, which is where they are currently heading to. Tell his captain what was the hollow like? Toshiro asked, curious about the behavior of a being who was supposed to act on only instinct. The hollow seemed to have become more rational according to the Zanpakuto. He even showed some degree of care for those who had helped Ichigo get to the seireitei. Byakuya replied coldly, not wanting to admit that a hollow could have such a thing as rationality. Where is the hideout located? Suifeng demanded. We need to move as quickly as possible if we want to stop this threat to the Soul Society. They said it was located southwest of the seireitei, and that it would take 2 hours, but I believe that he could be there sooner if we leave now. Byakuya answered coldly. Then we shall aid the substitute. He has done much for the Soul Society, and we cannot stand and watch him fall into the ways of a hollow. Yamamoto said, tapping his stick on the floor as he spoke their command. All squad captains and lieutenants apart from those of squads 4, 5, 12 and 13 shall take part in the attack on the Oni. You shall leave immediately. Everyone sprang into action as they prepared to attack the Oni and prevent Ichigo from turning into a hollow. The captains all went back to their barracks, giving orders to those who were left in charge and grabbing their Zanpakuto. Within 5 minutes of the captains' meeting ending, those who had been permitted to go were at the southern gate of the seireitei. Unknown to them, Kasumi and Akira had snuck away from their teacher, and after being given some ryatsu-suppressing coats from a man in a green hat and wooden clogs, he told them that no matter what Ichigo thought, they were strong enough to help him and he would need their help. In the world of the living, it's another hell butterfly. Rukia read the message, tears still in her eyes as she turned to faces a crying Orihime who was being comforted by Tasuki, Chad and Ishida, who were too shocked to do anything. We've been told to remain here while they go and help Ichigo. If it comes down to Ichigo becoming a hollow, they're going to send a captain to protect us from Ichigo's hunger if he gets out of control. Kurosaki-kun. Orihime murmured, wondering how it had come to this. Ichigo had been fine lately. They'd been nothing to suggest that his hollow was taking control again. She would have known. Seeing first had what it was capable of had left an imprint on her mind, and none of that had been present in Ichigo since that time. Don't worry, Orihime, Ichigo won't lose. The fool's too stubborn to lose, no matter who the enemy. Rukia said in an attempt to soothe Orihime as well as herself. Judging from what the Hell Butterfly had said, Ichigo was in bad shape, but she wouldn't tell the others. It'd make them worry too much, and where would be the point in that? Urahara had left to the Soul Society saying he needed to do something for Ichigo, but not what specifically. Back with Ichigo, he was close, he could feel it. The air was thick with ryatsu similar to that of the Oni he had fought before. As he closed in on the ryatsu, the terrain around him changed from lush green forests to rocky hills and uneven ground. Rain still poured down, making the ground hard to traverse, as it gave the rocks a slight sheen which occasionally cast reflections of Ichigo. The reflections would have scared him, but the emotion had left him now, so he was left feeling empty unless angered or full of hatred. He stopped just outside an entrance to a cave from which the ryatsu was coming from. At the entrance of the cave there stood a man who looked similar to the girl he had fought earlier. His face was too carved in anger as he strolled towards Ichigo, his red-skinned hand on his sword that hung against his side unsheathed. The blade was thick and seemed to have 2 handles, but it was indistinguishable from afar. So you're the one they're trying to use. The harsh voice rumbled around the valley of rocks. Ichigo had just come through. I cannot allow you to enter our haven, you would have it destroyed. I came here to try and talk it out. You think I want to turn into a monster? I'll kill everyone I care for. Ichigo tried to reason, but he could tell it was futile just from looking at the Oni, who had now stopped 10 meters from Ichigo. Then you know how it feels. We were once human. Well, most of us were. When we were attacked by the Oni, we unintentionally become one. Since then we were hunted because of the way we live. It is not our fault we need to consume souls. They keep us alive and we would consume those of hollows, but then we would become mad with raw instinct, only become worse than what we actually are. The angry from the Oni vibrated around the valley, causing rocks to shake as if they were connected. Our loved ones were all killed, children slaughtered because they couldn't run away fast enough, and now it shall happen again because of the mistake of one foolish woman on her quest for revenge. Then just release me from this spell, and I shall be gone. Ichigo yelled. If they don't want the Soul Society here, then why don't they let me go? I think that he is lying about that part. Although he is being truthful about everything else, his thirst for revenge is overwhelming. That doesn't matter. I shall end your life here if that's what it takes. Maybe then the process shall be finished, and we shall be free. Grabbing his sword from his side, he split it in two and charged towards Ichigo, red Ryatsu surrounding his blades as they curved into twin scimitars. I didn't want it to come to this. Ichigo's monotone voice did little to convey the sadness he'd lost. Some just don't have rationality like me, King. You forget, Shiro, you've only just got yours. Won't it be gone when I break the spell? I suppose it will, but it's nice while it lasts. You better not die, Kingy. You know what I'll do if that happens and no one can stop me. The threat crawled its way through Ichigo's mind as he blocked the Oni's attack. I told you before, I will not lose. The resolve is what the Hollow had been hoping for it. It would be needed for the battles Ichigo had yet to come. They were evenly matched. Him and the Oni. It was the same thing over and over again. Block, counter, while the Oni did the same thing. They'd been battling it out for only 10 minutes and were nowhere near finishing. Regardless of the stamina Ichigo had, he needed to finish this now. Time was running out, and the more he battled, the shorter that time became. The Oni so far had not shown any of the abilities Yukitake had mentioned. The only thing he had shown was pure speed and brute strength. The only advantage Ichigo had was his Bankai, which he had yet to use, but he couldn't always be relying on Tensai Zangetsu. Is this all the great Ichigo Kurosaki has? The Oni taunted as it stood a few meters in front, recoiling from the latest clash they'd had. The one who's going to destroy the Soul Society? Ha! Don't make me laugh. You probably couldn't even hurt a small fry hollow. You sure about that? Why don't you come test your new theory? Ichigo said it in a mocking tone that was unlike him. Che, thought you'd never ask. The Oni charged towards him at full force, swords raised. He attempted to slice one down Ichigo's face, but that, like all the others, was blocked. The other came to his side with the intention of ripping him in two. With not enough time to block it with his huge sword, Ichigo shunpoed to the Oni's unprotected side. The shunpo was just too slow. The blade caught him in the side, making a shallow cut that bleed profusely. This didn't faze Ichigo, as he had grown too used to wounds like this, and he simply continued with his attack. But the only thing he found himself attacking was an empty space. You gotta be faster than that, Soul Reaper, a rumbling harsh voice whispered behind him. Turning, Ichigo blocked the two red-coated scimitars, pushing them away as he swung Zangetsu back round, making the beginning of a deep cut across the Oni's chest before it used something similar to a shunpa to get away. That's more like it! The Oni yelled as it increased its Ryatsu by a huge margin. Crumble and crush, for I am Cookie, and vast and strong, and I am one with the earth that we walk on. By the way he said it, Ichigo guessed this was one of the abilities that Yukitake had mentioned. Cookie, the Oni he had been battling, started to change. His hair became a golden color but had now shortened in length. His skin started turning a deep brown as it became solid rock flecked with pieces of steel and other metals. The swords had completely disappeared with nothing to replace them. Ichigo knew better than to underestimate appearances. He'd realized that when he first battled with Urahara. So Soul Reaper, how do you like my true form? We call it the Demon Gate release, but there's no need to go into that now. Now's the time for fightin'. The rock-clad figure yelled before its arms morphed into pointed stumps, and he was charging back towards Ichigo. As Cookie did so, the ground lifted up around him. Small pieces began to twist and shape into multiple pointed shards. The shards glinted menacingly as they drilled through the air, quickly making their way towards Ichigo. Bringing his sword up, Ichigo was about to release to a Getsuga Tensho, but was interrupted by a familiar yell from behind him. Higher Inmaru. In an instant the piercing shards of solid rock had been frozen, as had the charging form of Cookie. Soon the ice began to crack as a baked earth-colored Ryatsu bubbled underneath, is almost melting it from the inside. Toshiro? Ichigo glanced over his shoulder to see the short elementary captain accompanied by 3 other captains, and just over that number of lieutenants. What are all you lot doing here? It's Captain Hitsugaya, Toshiro sighed. As for why we're here to either help you or eliminate you depending on the outcome of this. There were meant to be more of us, but they apparently had more pressure matters, and the captain commander saw no need for so many of us to go after they had persuaded him. I see. Well, thanks for the help, guys, but I think I can handle a few of them. That monotone voice again wove its way around everyone who heard it, leaving the captains on edge about how much Ichigo had changed during such little time. This is not up for debate, boy. You are to go on ahead with the rest of us while Captain Hitsugaya deals with this opponent. Byakuya's cold tone demanded he obeyed as he, Kenpachi, Sui Fong and the lieutenants Omida, Ranjaku, Yuichiro, who was probably on Kenpachi's back, and Hisagi strode towards him. The look in their eyes told him that he would continue even if they had to make him. Okay, I'll leave it to Toshiro. Ignoring Toshiro's complaining and Ranjaku's failed attempt at soothing him, which just turning into more teasing, Ichigo continued at the giant cave entrance, but no emotion carried him towards his goal. Did he even want to kill the Oni? That was the doubt that lay in his mind as he called back to the others. Are we going then? I don't have long, you know. By the way, Byakuya, where's Rinji? Lieutenant Abarai is currently recovering from a mass intake of sake. Byakuya said. His cold noble eyes not only glared at Ichigo but also Ranjaku, who Ichigo assumed was the reason for Renji's hangover. She however seemed not to notice. The cave was dark but not so dark that they couldn't see. The occasional torch lined the spacious chiseled-out corridors. No one spoke as they made their way through. There was too much resting on this as a whole. There was the possibility that Ichigo wouldn't break the spell in time, that the seireitei could be destroyed if they failed to contain Ichigo, and then there was the chance that they would all die. No one knew exactly what to expect from the Oni. Their origin was almost unknown, as were their abilities. The echoes their footsteps made became louder as they entered a vast arena that was currently occupied by the silhouettes of at least 4 opponents. Suddenly light flared around the arena and the darkness was forced to retreat into the furthest depths of the arena. The figures could now all be seen in their entirety. 2 were almost identical while the remaining 2 had the air of menace about them. They already appeared to be in their demon gate forms and ready to fight for whatever it was that they believed in. The only difference between the 2 who were identical was their hair and the clothes they wore. One had an unnaturally shiny gray-colored mane of hair while the other had a tarnished copper color. And then Ichigo realized that their hair wasn't the normal kind. It was made up of differently lengthened sharp metals which in its wholeness reminded Ichigo of porcupines. Although their clothes were different, there wasn't that much difference between them. They both wore body suites that contained a longish sash around the waist like a skirt, and calf-high flat boots to top it off. The 2 wore opposite colors to each other. While the steel-haired one was clad in a copper body suit and steel-colored boots and sash, the other was clad in a steel-colored suit and copper boots and sash. The overall conclusion was that they were obviously twins that had attempted to look different, but ended up looking the same overall. The other 2 were both guys. They both wore the same thing, but looked nothing alike. One was tall, well-built, and had short, flaming red hair that was literally on fire. In fact, the whole of his body was one big talking flame of intensity. Under the flames you could just make out the outfit that were black pants of a shihakusho complete with a bare chest covered only by a strip of material that would have held a sword. The other guy wore the same clothes but had long deep purple hair that radiated pain that could poison the very soul. He appeared to have not entered the demon gate form, but the grin that was plastered on his face said otherwise. The last thing that made them appear powerful was the color of their skin. They were all a dark abyssal black that seemed to absorb what little light there was in the arena. Ichigo knew this was bad, but again the lack of any helpful emotion prevented his warning appearing on his face. These guys must be the high-up ones Yukitake was telling me about. Ichigo started and would have said more had Suifeng not interrupted. The others will deal with them, Kurosaki. We are leaving now. And with that Ichigo was dragged away by Suifeng before he even knew what was going on. She pulled him along as she shunpoed over the maniacal grinning Oni and into the small tunnel that had been located behind them. As she did so, Ichigo decided it was time to see how long he had left. How long, guys? I'm afraid that your time is now less than 45 minutes, Ichigo. Zangetsu's solemn voice was barely reaching Ichigo now that the time had become so short. Where did it all go? Well, there was that fight. You probably didn't realize it, Kingi, but your left leg's now fully hollow, and the right is almost done. The hollow's voice reached him louder than normal, but Ichigo couldn't care nor find any other emotion to perk interest in what was going on. His hope was gone. His caring nature was gone, as were any other things that made him Ichigo. I see. Well, I guess this is it. Do not give up, Ichigo. Don't worry, King. You're doing everything exactly right. Shiro cut over Zangetsu. Ichigo could sense a faint smirk from the hollow, but nothing more. Are you going to make me carry you everywhere? Suifeng's stern voice asked him as she let go of him. I was checking how long there was left. Emotionless and cold, the words made their way from Ichigo's mouth. A hint of the hollow, distorted voice was barely audible behind the words, but it was still there. Suifeng picked up on this, and deduced that the boy probably had about just over 30 minutes until he was done for. Nodding, Suifeng indicated for him to continue as they followed the trail of the strong, unknown spiritual pressure that was their enemy. Kasumi and Akira. Are you sure it's this way, Kasumi-chan? Akira sighed. He and Kasumi had lost sight of the captains and moments later felt clashes of spiritual pressure which they then began to follow. Not before getting lost, however. Yes, I'm sure. Look, I can see something just over that rock. Kasumi pointed to a large rock that was the outcropping of the side of the cliff. Her and Akira didn't know this. She went skipping over to the giant rock, almost falling off when she came to a sudden halt inches from the edge. Looking below her, she saw the captain of Squad 10 fighting against a man made from rock. The captain seemed to be winning, but they had little time to assess the battle as they had to catch up with Ichigo. Thankfully, it was easy to sneak into the cave opening because of the Riasta masking cloaks they had been given. Once inside the cave, they felt more clashes of spiritual pressure, but promptly ignored it as they eventually found the source of it in a giant stone arena. Without glancing at the ongoing battles, they carefully edged their way around the arena, trying not wince when they heard the slicing and carving of flesh, nor to retch when the putrid smell of blood hit them. Leaving the giant foul-smelling arena behind them, they made haste to catch up with Ichigo. They didn't know why they would be needed or how they would be able to help someone like Ichigo, but they knew that they wanted to support Ichigo in whatever way they could. The tunnel that they traversed down was darker than the rest of the place, and it gradually became smaller and smaller until they reached an old wooden door. They could sense Ichigo on the other side and opened the door a crack. Just enough to see, but not enough to be noticed by. Through the crack they could see a frightening figure that looked nothing like the others they had seen. This one looked like death itself, a black skeletal body that was shrouded in a loose black and smoky green cloak. The hood had been pulled down to reveal a hollowed face whose blackened skin stretched over, and was illuminated by plain green eyes. The rest of the face was how all the others looked, but worse. The lack of flesh left the angry expression pulled taut over all the features, making it look like it was about to rip open. The rotting bone tusks were sharpened to a point, and attempted a smirk that the skin shouldn't have allowed. The figure held only a single slither of metal that glowed a sickening green and yellow. In an instant the figure of death was gone from their sights and appeared right in front of them, its eyes inhumanly twinkling with cruelty, as he grabbed them both by the neck, dragging them back with him. They tried to scream, but no sound would escape their lips. All they could do was struggle as they tried to loosen the creature's hold. Glazing forwards they saw Ichigo. His face showed no emotion or any trace that he cared they had gotten caught. But in his eyes they could see a deep rage brewing, and with it came the quickest change that had happened yet, and in that instant his leg was hollowified, the clawed feet digging into the ground in frustration as he strained to control his anger. To his left on the floor something caught their movement. It was Sui Feng, the captain of Squad 2 and commander of the stealth forces. She was twitching and writhing in pain from something they couldn't see. They had no more time to look at her because their heads were forced to face forwards, to face Ichigo as the man of death said some of the last words they would ever hear. "What would happen, dear Ichigo, if I were to show you how I can expend my power? How about on these two?" The voice sounded like many others were combined with it. Pain-filled moans echoed through the room they were held in. The grip on the back of their necks tightened as both Akira and Kasumi felt something pierce their chests. It was numb, they couldn't feel anything. If they were to describe it, then it felt like they were floating. But that was at one single point. After that point, when the foreign object twisted its way into their heart, pain literally pulled out their heart and burned it. At first it felt cold and they didn't realize what was happening, but then the anger on Ichigo's face told them as the transformation almost finished itself. "Don't Angrino, hollow." Kasumi coughed to Ichigo. She didn't want him becoming a hollow because they had been stupid enough to think they could help them. That was the last thing she said before darkness descended upon her, and her mind refused to respond to her commands to move as she felt her body crash to the floor along with Akira. The coughs coming from Kasumi had confirmed what Akira knew happened. They had been killed in the hope that Ichigo would go full hollow. That had failed. Kasumi's final plea to Ichigo had gotten through and his anger had subsided for now. Although they had only known Ichigo for a short time, it didn't matter. They knew that when they first saw him that he was a great man. Not because he defeated Eisen in the Winter War, but because he always put those he cared about above himself no matter what the cost. Such as when he invaded the seireitei to save Rukia Kichiki from execution with only a handful of people. But he'd done it, and in doing so had changed some laws of the seireitei that had been round since the beginning. Those last thoughts of Akira and Kasumi faded into nothingness as they crashed to the floor, lifeless. The only thing they heard was the ear-piercing cry of Ichigo's now fully hollowified form. "I'm sorry, King, but I'm fed up of being the horse. Your emotions make you weak. So weak I can easily squash out you and Zangetsu." Shiro cackled in Ichigo's inner world as he gazed down at the unconscious bodies of Ichigo and Zangetsu, a smirk evident on his face. Everything had happened just how he expected. Ichigo had never realized, and now he was in control. "Let's get this started, shall we? I haven't had a proper fight in ages." Shiro screeched, an insane smile creeping onto his ice-white face as he covered it with his mask. "We're lost, aren't we, Akira?" Kasumi asked, annoyed. It was raining. They'd lost that captain's and had also managed to lose themselves. Some help they were supposed to be. The man in the green cloak had barely given them directions before disappearing into the forest. He was strange though. His Ryatsu was strange compared to other Shinigami, but Akira and Kasumi had both shrugged it off. too focused on helping Ichigo in any way they could. No, we're not lost. We're just taking a detour. Akira joked, but unfortunately Kasumi was in no mood for joking. But that was what you got when you'd been standing out in the pouring rain for God knows how long trying to follow Soul Reaper captains to a secret base. Taking a detour? You know we don't have time for that. Didn't you see Ichigo when we last saw him? He was practically a hollow. Kasumi screamed at him as she began to chase him through the forest, her Zanpakuto raised threateningly in the air. Okay, I admit it. Hey, watch it, Akira called as he ducked just in time to avoid her swing. We're lost. But we'll find them, don't worry. I still don't see how we can help him. You sure you want to go? Yes. Kasumi nodded. We have to help him. If we don't, he'll turn into a mindless hollow, and well, Ichigo just can't turn into a hollow. I know we haven't spent much time with him, but I know he'd do the same for us. I'm just worried about Akira was cut off as Kasumi punched him in the face. What was that for? For doubting him. It doesn't matter what, but we have to go. And right now would be a good start. Kasumi's determination reflected in her eyes, and Akira knew there would be no deterring her now. Well, I'm glad to hear that. A familiar sing-song voice called through the trees to the pair. You know you're almost there, just 10 more minutes in that direction. The man in the green coat appeared in front of them, his face covered by his forward-tilting hat as he used his fan to point out the direction right behind them. They sighed as they realized that the spiritual pressure was so strong in that direction. They felt stupid for not realizing it before. Thank you, Kasumi tried to think of a name for him. Fan-sama. We'll be going now. Akira's sweat dropped while muttering. Seriously, that's all you could come up with, Kasumi-chan? Well, sorry, it's not up to your standards. She pouted. I'll prepare names in advance next time. Good luck, you two. The fan appeared over his face as he turned to Shunpa away. Akira thought he caught the stranger muttering, "You're going to die anyway." But he must have been mistaken and turned to Shunpa in the direction he indicated. Then realized something else had caught his attention when the man had turned around. It had been black hair, just like the hair the other Oni had, but his was shorter. Something wasn't adding up, and Akira quickly shoved the suspicions to the back of his mind, unable to hear the calls of his Zanpakuto trying to tell him that he was right to be suspicious. Akira and Kasumi, a short distance from Toshiro's battle. It had taken more than 10 minutes for them to get there, thanks to Kasumi wanting to stop and admire some rare flowers that sent shivers down Akira's spine. A deadly nightshade, the plant that hinted at the death and deception that were soon to unfold, but the pieces were to connect too slowly in Akira's mind. He was too concerned about Kasumi and her well-being as they continued this apparently suicide mission. Akira knew better than to attempt to argue with her. His suspicions had no reasoning behind them due to them being just suspicions. Nevertheless, he could have a last try at deterring her from this foolish mission. You sure you want to do this? Akira whispered to her as they debated how to sneak around the currently fighting Captain Histageya. She sighed, bored of the question he had been repeating to her since Fan-sama had appeared again. Yes, I'm sure. We must be able to do something for Ichigo anyway. It's too late to turn back now. His silence was his agreement, but was Ichigo really worth their deaths? He liked Ichigo even though they'd only meet him for a while, but the guy seemed to have an air to him. One that caused people to gather around him. Because he had such pure intentions towards them, no matter whom they were or what their past was. But would Ichigo want them to put themselves in danger for his sake? The stories that he'd heard about Ichigo always contained parts where he refused to let people put their lives on the line. It was too late now. They'd stepped into the lion's den, and could do nothing but spring whatever trap had been put in place. The cave's darkness sealed their fate as it smothered Akira and Kasumi with the killer intent that bleached the air. Akira and Kasumi, inside the cave, you can guess where. They were hiding behind the door. Ichigo was on the other side, as was another captain, but their spiritual pressure was barely detectable. Looking Kasumi in the eyes, he realized something that he hadn't noticed before. Her eyes had a glaze over them, one that gave her the look of confidence, but looking deeper he realized that she was crying out to him. She knew that this was wrong, but he had failed to hear her cries, and it was now too late. They both sucked in a gasp as something grabbed them. They knew they had failed to help save Ichigo the moment they saw him. His pure white face was contorted with rage as his humanity slipped away, his eye turning to the same gold on black color as the other. Kasumi used her last dregs of life to try choke out a final plea. Don't doubt Angrino. Hollow. She didn't want him to turn into a hollow even though it was already too late. All that was left in Ichigo now was a mindless creature intent on consuming souls. Kasumi could feel her life fading away, as could Akira. They both looked into each other's eyes for the final time as they relived the first time they had met each other. Kasumi had been alone. Always alone. For some unknown reason people avoided her, and when she went up to others they would ignore her or kick her away. Back then she'd had a pitiful existence. But that was before Akira had discovered her. He, despite others' warnings, had befriended Kasumi. He had become her first friend. Her only friend. That was probably why she wanted to protect Ichigo so much. She didn't want to lose one of the few friends she had. They'd first met by a riverbank. Kasumi had been attempting to catch fish all day. Akira had known. He'd visited the river in the morning and had returned in the evening to catch some more food. She had been struggling and hadn't managed to catch a single one all day. Taking pity on the girl everyone avoided, Akira had given her some of his cooked fish. They talked only briefly as she'd run off after quickly consuming her food, scrambling away like he was going to pelt her with rocks like all the others in the Rukongai. He watched her carefully that week and had seen how she acted. She lived up to the name of the Rukongai. She was a wandering soul. She had no purpose, but in the end he'd given her one. After numerous attempts he'd persuaded her to join the academy, and they'd been friends since. He'd been in the year above her, but it didn't seem to bother her. They had meet up whenever they could. To this day Akira had never understood the fear others held for Kasumi. She was a loving person with hair that was as black as the night, and eyes that sparkled and glowed as bright as the bluest sun. Yeah. There are blue suns. Didn't really believe it myself. The life in those eyes had no gone as had his. He was only sad that she'd never had a happier life, but what was the point in dwelling on it now? They were both dead and gone. The screams and howls of Ichigo as a hollow would haunt them into their next life. The guilt that they had done this would forever be imprinted on their souls. They'd had their last moments, and now their time was up. It was raining, and that was never a good sign when it came to battles that mattered. The dark sky looked ominous, and there was darkness in the air that was so subtle you only knew it was there because it sent shivers down your spine. Toshiro could feel that something very wrong was going to happen. This fight would have to be quick, and his opponent had the upper hand. "Why'd you let them pass?" Toshiro asked his opponent, who was currently covered in a rock-based skin. "There are others that will deal with them, but by now many have escaped, as we knew you would also here." The Oni growled out, morphing its bladed arms into two heavy-looking hammers. "Don't be so sure." "Oni!" Toshiro was confident in his fellow captain's abilities to stop any of the Oni left in the cave as well as catch up with those who had escaped. "Che, I can tell you're underestimating my power. One of the Oni's main abilities is to sense and read souls." If his face could stretch into a grin it would have, but alas, the Oni's face stayed carved in anger. "Let's finish this." Taking his battle stance as he spoke, Hyarinmaru in front of him ready to strike. "I am Squad 10 Captain Toshiro Hastegeya. I suppose you'll need to know the name of your killer, Captain." The Oni sneered at him. The hammers crossed in front of him, one further forwards than the other. "Cookie, that is all my name need be." They charged at each other, both bringing their weapons up for an attack. One that would have hit Toshiro, but the small captain used a quick shunpa to avoid the attack and brought his Zanpakuto down on the Oni. Hyarinmaru made contact with something, but it wasn't skin. It was hard rock that cracked and crumbled to the ground seconds after the hit. "You'll have to be less obvious than that," a voice whispered from above. Cookie was surrounded by small missiles, made from more rock. They spun around the Oni as he charged down at Toshiro. He was too fast. He left no time for Toshiro to even try and put up a good defense. An attempt to shunpa and block at the same time more or less failed. At least two of the shards hit him, as well as one of the hammers clipping his ribs. The shards had indented themselves into his left arm, rendering it useless. Blood cascaded to the floor, and even though the fight had been going on for so little time, the bloodied captain knew he had to use Bankai. His opponent was strong. He knew the others were battling just as strong opponents. Their spiritual pressure was working at maximum, and he could tell they were all tiring. However, one thing worried Toshiro, and that was how more hollow-like Ichigo's Ryatsu was getting. But there was nothing he could do about it right now. He needed to finish this fight first. Bankai, Daiguren Hyarinmaru. Wings and a tail of pure ice grew out from the young captain. But they soon became soaked in the still pouring rain, just as Toshiro and Cookie were. The blood that was flowing from the wounds became mixed with the rain, and streams ran down onto the icy tail, tainting it slightly. "Becoming desperate, are we?" Cookie taunted, preparing for another attack. New shards primed for an assumed final attack. "This need to finish now," was all the captain said before starting his final assault. The wings flared out. Cookie charged. Toshiro charged. The spiraling rock was frozen in an instant, and they fell to the muddy floor, now harmless. Two hammers were brought down. One was frozen and the other sliced off. The Oni howled in pain as black blood poured out from the now handless arm, revealing that Cookie was only wearing a layer of stone that deflected light attacks. White bones protruded from within the black blood and skin, a stark contrast that was only visible for a moment before it was sealed over with stone, preventing any more blood being lost. Ignoring the loss of a hand, the Oni continued its assault. The hammer was now a long sword as it attempted to hack and slice away as much of Toshiro as he could. A few of the strikes made their way through his defense, but it was a small price to pay for what he would do next. While the Oni had been attacked, Toshiro had also made small cuts that had yet to close up. Water had found its way into the cuts, and they would soon freeze. Using Zanhyo Ninjyo, Toshiro left the ice doll as he shunpoed behind Cookie, stabbing him through the back and freezing him from the inside. The water in the wounds also froze over and expanded, ripping open the skin. Blood had flowed out, seeping through the ice and streaming down the rock. But that wasn't all. Ice exploded from Cookie's chest, piecing outwards, shattering the rock skin covering the Oni. The battle was over, but Toshiro felt no sense of pride over the victory he'd accomplished. Instead, he felt shame that it had come to this and that nothing could have prevented it. Coughing came from the Oni, who was currently lying on the floor after Hyarimura had been removed from his chest. The spikes of ice were still there, blood coating them among other organs that should never leave the body. Walking over to the dying Oni, Toshiro exited him Bankai. There was no need for it now. The battle was over, that was evident from his opponent's dying form. Che, that was a good fight. Shini, he fell into a fit of coughing and eventually was silent. The face still fixed into its angry expression, but there was no real emotion behind it. The red eyes were blank and glassed over, vacant of any life that had existed. The rest of the body was matted in blood and mud, cold and lifeless as it began to crumble. The ice in his chest started to disperse first. It was then followed by the Oni's limp body as it faded into spirit particles. The particles made their way up into the still dark sky, their path undisturbed by the continuing rain. It should have been different. There was nothing more the distant cold captain could say. He knew that the Oni were the enemy, but couldn't help feeling that this was all senseless and mindless fighting over pointless things. The question, why had they done this to Ichigo, floated into his mind, and he hoped he would find the answer soon. Toshiro headed into the cave where the others were. He could sense that all their fights had finished too, but they were all like him, extremely tired. The Oni had put up a good fight, but in the end they had lost. That's what Toshiro thought until he arrived at the big open arena in the cave. There was a sudden rise in Ichigo's Ryatsu as it became more twisted and hollow-like. It eventually stabilized and was now like that of a Vasto Lord. Suifon's Ryatsu was barely there, as if she were either dead or on the verge of death. But that wasn't possible. She was a captain and commander of the stealth forces. How could she get taken down when they weren't, do you think? Toshiro trailed off, not wanting to admit what had happened. Yes, he has lost it all. We must now do what we were sent to do, the ever-dutiful noble Byakuya said as he shunpoed away. Even with his arm shredded among other injuries, he was attempted to take on a fully reformed Ichigo. He was mad. But there were 7 of them, and they would be more than a match for the Vasto Lord. Everyone started after Byakuya, ready to complete a mission they had hoped would never need completing. Tracking the Ryatsu of Ichigo, they arrived at what remained of a heavy wooden door. It was blown outwards, pieces scattered everywhere in any direction. Through the doorway, the captains saw the hollow Ichigo deal fatal blows to the students he'd befriended only hours beforehand. None of the captains cared at that moment for how they'd gotten caught up in this fight. They only cared about stopping a mindless hollow that would surely kill anyone Ichigo was ever involved with. They started through the doorway just in time to see a thin black blade protruding from an Oni's chest. Maniacal laughter echoed throughout the room, but it was cut short as small cracks started appearing in the mask. The captains froze, not wanting to dispose of him if Ichigo was able to regain control. Omida, Ranjaku, and Hisagi had been pulled away by the poisonous-looking Oni, who had already managed to knock out Omida even after he had released his Shurikai. The remaining 2 captains and a lieutenant had yet to begin their blood-filled battle. Byakuya and Kenpachi, along with Yuichiro, who still clung to his shoulder, now stood facing 2 twin Onis who merely stood looking at them, one with the look of complete disinterest and the other with increasing excitement. "Oh, look, Fuyuko! We've got 2 more toys to play with!" The bladed copper-haired Oni squealed. "How exciting, Natsuko! I don't think they'll last long, though." The others didn't. The steel-haired Oni looked bored as she touched her stiff hair, instantly turning it into long, flowing locks. The other twin did the same, simply looking put out as she twirled a piece of hair round her eerie black finger. "But they look strong, and they're captains too." Natsuko pouted as she continued to play with her hair, eyed up the 2 captains who also looked completely uninterested. "Remember what he said? He said that they're nothing, they can easily be whipped from existence, and are merely pawns under the control of that thing." Fuyuko sneered, causing her hair to turn back into the cruel blades that it once was. "Humph! But look what happened to him. He got taken down by these pathetic beings and now we have to go break a. Natsuko sighed and again copied her twin, turning her hair into shining copper blades. Looks like you guys think you're tough enough to fight. Let's see how strong you are. Kenpachi roared his chipped and worn-down blade ready a fight. Ichigo. Yes, Kenchan, the pink-haired lieutenant called happy as she clung to his back peering over the top at the Onis. Sit this one out, I'm going all out. He told her. Okay Kenchan, have fun. Ichigo called happily jumping off Kenpachi's shoulder, and then proceeded to sit on a rock ready to watch the battle. Now ready to fight, Kenpachi charged towards both the Oni, bringing his nameless Zanpakuto up for a powerful strike. Both Oni merely hopped out the way looking unimpressed by the attack. Even after that they made no attempt to attack either of the captains. Such a brute would never be able to take on both of these enemies as once. Byakuya's cold voice called to Kenpachi mockingly. And a stuck-up noble like you can? You know we never got to finish that fight in Hueco Mundo, why don't we finish it now? Kenpachi challenged, turning back towards Byakuya, holding his blade with 2 hands. A fight is something that would last longer than 2 seconds, therefore this shall be no fight. Byakuya said coldly as he dropped his Zanpakuto into the ground. Bankai, Senbenzakura Kageyoshi. Multiple big swords appeared from the ground and then made the quick transition from solid blade to deadly elegant pink-bladed petals. They began swirling around Byakuya in a gentle whirlwind ready to strike at a moment's notice. I hope you guys aren't going to ignore us. After all, we have decided to go all out. Natsuko whined, slightly shaking her head, making light high-pitched noises as metal scraped against metal. TCH, looks like we'll have to finish this afterwards. I call the steel one. Kenpachi called to Byakuya as he launched himself at the steel-haired woman. The strike was deflected with a sheet of steel that was the woman's hair. It had curved round Fuyuko at the last second, protecting her completely from Kenpachi's heavy-handed strike. Jumping back, Kenpachi prepared for another assault. Oh, so you're going to battle me? Well, I advise you don't go easy on me. Others before did that and well, let's just say they were barely an appetizer. Fuyuko grinned as she licked her lips, accepting Kenpachi's challenge. Reaching behind her head, Fuyuko pulled at a strand of the flowing steel hair and brought it in front of her, morphing it into a guardless steel katana. Alright. Let's fight. Kenpachi ripped off his eye patch. The monstrous spiritual pressure that was his became unleashed. A maniacal grin spread across his face as well as Fuyuko's, and they both charged at each other, eager to fight. So, does what mean you're going to fight me? Natsuko pouted at Byakuya, who was currently glaring in the direction of Kenpachi's destructive fight. For the protection of the seireitei, I must eliminate anyone who poses a threat. With a glance and a single flick of his wrist, Byakuya sent a shower of blades raining down on the childish Oni. The blades crashed into the ground where the Oni was, confirmation that they had hit their target. Well, that wasn't nice. You should have waited until I was ready. Natsuko complained from behind Byakuya. Why don't we start again? I'm ready to play now, Kenpachi and Fuyuko. Good thing you're not a pushover. This is gonna be fun. Kenpachi ran at Fuyuko, bringing repeated slashes down on her, which in turn were blocked almost effortlessly with her thin katana. She retaliated with quick slices from multiple directions, occasionally using her metal hair to whip round and catch him in the back. But those attacks were also blocked by the unstoppable Kenpachi. They were pretty evenly matched, and Kenpachi was finding it nearly impossible to get any attacks through her defense. It would have continued that way had it not been for Fuyuko's lax in defense at a certain moment. Oh wow! You bastard! That really hurts! Natsuko's cry reverberated around the arena for everyone to hear. The reason for the cry was a small cut on both her left arm and cheek. Her opponent saw no reason to stop and continued his gracefully deadly assault. Fuyuko, however, had turned to see what was wrong with her twin with a panic-stricken expression on her face. The distraction was at the wrong moment for her, and Kenpachi managed to land an almost fatal blow on her. The rough, unnamed Zanpakuto came down heavy on her torso, ripping down from her shoulder to her waist, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. The cut wasn't deep enough to show bone, but it was deep enough to cause severe pain and leave a big handicap. Screaming from the burning pain in her right shoulder, Fuyuko's eyes filled with rage as she charged at Kenpachi. Steel-haired blades stood on end, curving towards Kenpachi, and an angry white haze coated them. Cries and moans howled from the coated blades. It was the cries of all those she had eaten in her long lifetime, and they were now mere shadows of themselves, filled with nothing but rage. Kenpachi stood there with a grin on his face, happy now that she was taking him seriously. He wondered if the blades would cut his skin, a feat only a few had been capable of. He raised his sword and blocked as many of the blades as he could. A few made it through and they cut into his shoulders and between his ribs. The girl in front of him grinned and flicked her head up. the white-coated blades ripped up. Some scrapped against his bones, sending vibrations through his body, while others simply tore through flesh, leaving a trail of blood behind them. The wounds didn't faze Kenpachi, not even the amount of blood that was creating a pool on the floor. They only made Kenpachi more eager to fight. But the girl wasn't interested. She was too busy running over to her twin, who now lay in a heap on the floor in a puddle of blood. Around her lay the shattered remains of her copper-bladed hair. The blades had the same white coating on them as her twin, but it was beginning to fade just like her life. The next event that occurred surprised both captains, but would only make things more interesting in the fight that was yet to end. A brilliant white light had enveloped both figures, hiding them both from view. A blast of spiritual pressure was emitted from inside the white light, creating a plume of dust that making it even more impossible to detect what was going on. The dust soon cleared, and from it strode one lone figure. A lone angry figure. Byakuya and Natsuko. Byakuya shunpoed up towards the ceiling and away from the voice behind him, narrowly avoiding an assault to the head in the process. Natsuko chased him, snapping two blades from her mane and throwing them at him with deadly accuracy. Using the palms of his hands, Byakuya directed Senbenzakura's blades at the oncoming projectiles, knocking them off course. "Humph! What about this?" shrieked Natsuko as she aimed all her hair forwards and launched multiple copper fragments at him. These, like the ones before them, were easily knocked away. As Byakuya launched barrage of petals towards her, not expecting the fragments he'd sent straight to boomerang back towards him with such malice. Heido number 73 Soren Sokatsui. Byakuya shot a powerful blue blast at the oncoming fragments, completely destroying most of them, with others managed to sneak their way past the monstrous blast. Only a few got past the Kido spell, catching Byakuya's face, arms, and torso in the process, leaving small shallow cuts. Byakuya turned to face the childlike Oni and instantly shunpoed to her, bringing together the tiny blades of Senbenzakura into a normal-sized Zanpakuto and stabbing her through the chest before she could react. He missed her heart by inches, but that didn't matter. The girl would have little energy to keep on battling, and even less combat capability due to her wounds. Natsuko screamed as she fell from where they had been battling and near the top of the cavern. The screaming got the attention of her twin, who started fighting Kenpachi with even more determination than before. The screaming stopped as she hit the floor, and her anger grew too. A cruel white substance coated all of her mane, turning the warm copper blades into a harsh, angry orange. The stubborn Oni pulled herself up, but before she could initiate an attack on Byakuya, she was halted. With a swipe of his hand, pink petals cascaded down on the recovering girl. She didn't stand a chance when those petals started towards her. They crashed into the side of her head with such force it snapped through the strong metal that was her hair. To add to the damage, the side of her body was ripped through in the collision, sending blood spraying onto the shattered blades of her hair that lay on the floor. His opponent was down. His part was finished here, and he needed to move on to Kurosaki. The wounds he had gained weren't that serious. Even though blood drenched one of his sleeves while some ran down his face, he could feel the wounds slowly sealing over. Byakuya willed the tiny pink blades back to him, leaving the broken and torn body of Natsuko laying on the floor, barely breathing. Her sister appeared at her side, watching as the life left Natsuko's broken form. Suddenly, white light enveloped the two, creating dust in its wake as their spiritual pressure flared. The dust soon cleared as it fell towards the floor, revealing a single form. There was no body on the floor. The space where Natsuko's body lay was bare, and there was no sign of her twin. Both Byakuya and Kenpachi turned their attention towards their new opponent, who was exactly like Natsuko and Fuyuko had they been one person. The body they had taken was not without injury. Not even a transformation could erase the fatalities Natsuko had endured. Down the left side of the body, deep cuts were etched, and the blades remained shattered on the left side too. "This is for Natsuko." The form screeched, its hair standing on end in a color that was darker than night itself. It charged towards the captains, its bladed hair curled forwards and a single sword held in its right hand ready to strike. It was a final attempt by the twins, who knew they shouldn't fought like this from the start. Maybe then they would have had a chance. But now they'd never get the chance to save him from the prison the Shinigami kept him in, nor would they have the chance to thank him for saving their family from annihilation. The captains readied themselves. Kenpachi raised his Zanpakuto as he held it in both hands, and Byakuya braced his onslaught of blades as he waited for the right moment to strike. The figure reached them. The captains were too quick for her as they initiated their final attacks. Kenpachi left a huge gaping wound down the right side. His attack had smashed through the well-broke katana she had been holding, leaving only a stump clutched in her hand. Byakuya had then blown her backwards with the force of his assault, not only creating small cuts in her skin, but combined with Kenpachi's attack, he'd managed to separate the twins, sending them flying forwards in opposite directions. They landed a few meters apart at the base of two rocks. Both of them were covered in blood, but it didn't look any different. After all, their blood was black. They tried to crawl towards each other, over the shattered blades that had been their hair. They never made it as they had to stop because of the agonizing pain, and they soon let out blood-filled coughs, only managing one last word each. Fuyuko Natsuko coughed out. The wound near her heart had taken its toll as she slumped forwards. Small childish tears escaped her eyes, soaking the floor before coming to an abrupt stop as she was left cold and lifeless. Natsuko Fuyuko sighed, a single red tear escaping her eyes before they closed forever. The two captains watched as twins turned to spirit particles, which floated over their heads in the direction of the exit, disappearing into the darkness. Byakuya and Kenpachi were then promptly joined by Toshiro and then by the other lieutenants, including Yuichiro, who resumed her place on Kenpachi's back. Even Omida had managed to regain consciousness right as the battle ended. They were all tried and believed that they had succeeded in their mission. That was before they felt a sudden rise in Ichigo's Ryatsu as it became more twisted and hollow-like. It eventually stabilized and was now like that of a Vasta Lord. Suifon's Ryatsu was barely there, as if she were either dead or on the verge of death. But that wasn't possible. She was a captain and commander of the stealth forces. How could she get taken down when they weren't, do you think? Toshiro trailed off, not wanting to admit what had happened. Yes, he has lost it all. We must now do what we were sent to do, the ever-dutiful noble Byakuya said as he shunput away. Even with his arm shredded among other injuries, he was attempted to take on a fully reformed Ichigo. He was mad. But there were 7 of them, and they would be more than a match for the Vasto Lord. Everyone started after Byakuya, ready to complete a mission they had hoped would never need completing. Tracking the Ryatsu of Ichigo, they arrived at what remained of a heavy wooden door. It was blown outwards, pieces scattered everywhere in any direction. Through the doorway, the captains saw the hollow Ichigo deal fatal blows to the students he'd befriended only hours beforehand. None of the captains cared at that moment for how they'd gotten caught up in this fight. They only cared about stopping a mindless hollow that would surely kill anyone Ichigo was ever involved with. They started through the doorway just in time to see a thin black blade protruding from an Oni's chest. Maniacal laughter echoed throughout the room, but it was cut short as small cracks started appearing in the mask. The captains froze, not wanting to dispose of him if Ichigo was able to regain control. "You 3 without the Haori, I'll take you all on," a venomous voice called to Omida, Ranjaku and Hisagi. They turned around to see 2 men standing behind them. One was completely covered in fire while the other had long purple hair. He was the one he called over to them. As they walked over, they discussed who should take on who. "Omida and Ranjaku, I think you guys should take on the one with the purple hair. When you've dealt with him, I'll be glad to have assistance with the other," Hisagi suggested. The other 2 agreed with him, finding no reason to dispute. They shunput away in different directions. Hisagi headed to the man clad in fire while Omida and Ranjaku went to the poisonous man. "Omida and Ranjaku, so I only get 2? Well, this is going to be a short battle," gloated the purple-haired Oni. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Ranjaku growled, not in the mood for big-headed fools. She had a hangover, but even so had still been dragged along by her captain. "Yeah. Crush, Gejitsubiri," Omida commanded, and his Zanpakuto entered its shurikai, turning into a huge black spiked ball with a long chain attached to it. "Growl, Heiniko!" Ranjaku yelled. Her Zanpakuto disappeared from view as it morphed into a cloud of ash. "TCH, you won't last long against my poison." With the Oni wasn't given time to finish as Ranjaku sent the cloud of ash at the unsuspecting Oni. The tiny blades made contact with something. The blades cleared with a flick of Heiniko's hilt, only to reveal a purple fog that had managed to block most of the as. A few scratches lined the Oni's face and arms, and his face was twisted into anger as he signaled for the fog to disperse back into his hair. "Now that wasn't nice, was it?" He mocked to Ranjaku as he made another signal that caused the purple fog to rise from his hair and speed towards her. Ranjaku shunpoed out the way, flinging up a shield of ash as she did so to protect her from the unknown mist. At the same time, Omida had shunpoed behind the Oni and brought down Gejitsubiri upon the unsuspecting Oni. It made contact, slamming the Oni down into the ground and halting its attack. Crying out, the Oni hit the ground face first. Blood pooled out of the 4 stab wounds on its back. He had been foolish to underestimate how powerful lieutenants really were. "You bastard!" he snarled as he pulled himself from the small crater, disappearing from sight for an instant before appearing beside Omida. In an instant he'd raised his deadly black hand and brought it down on the back of Omida's neck, knocking him out cold. Omida crumpled to the floor, leaving Ranjaku to deal with the Oni, and boy did her head feel like someone had been pounding it all night long. It would be best to finish it soon so she could go back to the barracks and sleep away the rest of the day. Sending her blades of as in two different directions, Ranjika hoped to surround the Oni in a tornado of ash. The idea worked. She could hear the Oni yelling and cursing at her as the huge tornado or blades encircled the Oni, only slicing him slightly at the moment. A simple flick of her wrist, and the whirling mass of ash crushed into the Oni, ripping flesh from bone and tearing open multiple new wounds. The screams and howls echoed around the cavern, but everyone paid little notice as they were too busy with their own battles. The battle was more or less over, and Ranjika called back the blades into her Zanpakuto, letting the blood-stained Oni crumple to the floor. He was dead even before he hit the floor. He'd never had the chance to tell anyone his name. He'd always been a nobody. Even as a child, the others had ignored him. It hadn't mattered anyway. He was poison, and the others had known it. The only thing he held against the Soul Reapers was the fact that some had killed his mother many years ago. She had been out collecting nightshade plants. They'd been his favorite as a child. 2 Shinigami had seen her and murdered her in cold blood. She never stood a chance. She wasn't built for combat. She was built to be a mother, and nothing more. Ranjika left the Oni lying on the floor. He'd already begun to turn to spiritual ash as she turned to help Hisagi, who seemed to be winning in his battle. Omida she knew would be fine, and so she shunpoed over to Hisagi. At the same time Omida and Ranjika had started their battle. Hisagi glanced at his fiery opponent, taking note of what his likely abilities would be. It was obvious that the abilities would be to do with fire, but how that attribute would be applied was another matter. He could use balls of fire that could appear from thin air, or a blade made from fire that would appear in an instant and incinerate anything it touched. The Oni's demure appeared a calm, silent one. A stark contrast to his fiery appearance. Silently the Oni reached out its hand, summoning a spear made from fire. He pulled his arm back and then quickly slingshot the spear forwards, launching it at Hisagi. It was too fast for him to dodge, so all that was left for Hisagi to do was attempt to block. Raising his Zanpakuto just in time to collide with the flaming spear, the heated attack was only inches from his face. The heat licked at his face for only an instant before snapping back into nothingness. With no time to recover, the Oni fired 2 more spears at him. Hisagi managed to block one, but wasn't as lucky with the second, which hit him square in his right shoulder. The spear did little more than make a small scorched hole in his shoulder, but that wasn't to say it didn't hurt like hell. His flesh burned in a few seconds of agony before he snapped out of the pain and rolled out of the way of 2 more spears. Jumping in the air, Hisagi pulled back a ball of spirit energy before calling out the Kido command, Bakuto number 62 Hyaparankin. He threw the poles at the Oni with the intent to immobilize it, but the Oni simply sent fire to them. Cursing, Hisagi decided to release his Shurikai, Reap, Kazushini. 2 Kuzurigama-like weapons, each with 2 scythe blades, materialized in his hands, and Hisagi shunpoed towards the fiery Oni, who materialized his own flaming sword. One of the Kazurajima weapons collided with the Oni's swords, while 2 Kuzurigama-like weapons, each with 2 scythe blades, swung the other around, clipping the Oni in the back and its left arm before jumping back. As he did so, Hisagi threw one of the scythes at the Oni, wrapping the chain around its wrist, tugging it towards him. The attempt, however, didn't go as planned. The fire-clad Oni morphed into a stream of fire, releasing itself from the chain of Hisagi's Shurikai. Damn it! Hisagi cursed, reeling the scythes back in. A smirk crept its way onto the reforming figure of the blazing Oni, the first sign of any emotion from the being. Hisagi again launched the scythes at the Oni, but they were blocked again, and the Oni appeared at his side, bringing down the glaring swords that he repeatedly conjured after the ones before had crackled out into nothing. It was like a dance between the two. They were both at equal speed and equal combat ability. But Hisagi had an edge. It wasn't one that would always mean outright victory in a fight, but it was nonetheless an edge. Taking a chance, he blocked the flaring sword of the Oni with one of his scythes while he brought the other under him and sliced at the Oni's legs. The scythe made contact, and the Oni's moves slowed down, making it easier to dodge the incoming attacks. It was just after that Ranjika joined the fray. Hisagi nodded his thanks at her but signaled that he was almost done, so she would be best taking a break. Ranjika relaxed as she turned, walking away from the battleground towards the edge of the cavern. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her head from the pain of her evident hangover. Chuckling to himself at her typical drinking habits, Hisagi took his attention back to the Oni, who was grimacing in pain. His endurance was running out, and he wouldn't last much longer. Hisagi would initiate the final attack. He'd make it quick and painless if he could. Unlike his Zanpakuto, he didn't take joy in reaping the lives from others. He ran forwards, one of his scythes to the side while the other was in front of him. In mid-run, he shunpoed right in front of the Oni, whose flames were beginning to die down, and twisted, moving both the scythes through the Oni's stomach as well as through the heart. He shunpoed away, glancing back at the Oni, who seemed to smile before disappearing into a cloud of spirit particles which shot towards the exit of the cave, and towards the freedom of the sky. Hisagi didn't have time to dwell on the Oni's final behavior before Captain Hitsugaya appeared from his battle. They'd all defeated their opponents, and all that was left to them now was to stop Ichigo Kurosaki before he could no longer stop himself. Hisagi looked over to see that even Omida had managed to regain consciousness right as his battle ended. Hisagi could see that all the others hoped that Ichigo hadn't turned into a mindless may seem to think he was an eyesore at times, but he'd saved the Soul Society more times than they could remember. No one wanted the task of ending his life. It would be a waste of not only talent but also the waste of a compassionate soul. The boy may come back as a pure soul, but he wouldn't remain the same as he was now, and none of them wanted to lose that. At that point, everyone felt a sudden rise in Ichigo's Ryatsu as it became more twisted and hollow-like. Hisagi knew now that they would have no choice but to take down the substitute if they were to protect the seireitei. The Ryasatsu eventually stabilized and was now like that of a Vasta Lord. Suifeng's Ryatsu was barely there, as if she were either dead or on the verge of death. But that wasn't possible. She was a captain and commander of the stealth forces. How could she get taken down when they weren't, do you think? Toshiro trailed off, not wanting to admit what had happened. Yes, he has lost it all. We must now do what we were sent to do, the ever-dutiful noble Byakuya said as he shunput away. Even with his arm shredded among other injuries, he was attempted to take on a fully reformed Ichigo. He was mad. But there were 7 of them, and they would be more than a match for the Vasto Lord. Everyone started after Byakuya, ready to complete a mission they had hoped would never need completing. Tracking the Ryatsu of Ichigo, they arrived at what remained of a heavy wooden door. It was blown outwards, pieces scattered everywhere in any direction. Through the doorway, the captains saw the hollow Ichigo deal fatal blows to the students he'd befriended only hours beforehand. None of the captains cared at that moment for how they'd gotten caught up in this fight. They only cared about stopping a mindless hollow that would surely kill anyone Ichigo was ever involved with. They started through the doorway just in time to see a thin black blade protruding from an Oni's chest. Maniacal laughter echoed throughout the room, but it was cut short as small cracks started appearing in the mask. The captains froze, not wanting to dispose of him if Ichigo was able to regain control. Where did it all go? Well, there was that fight. You probably didn't realize it, Kingi, but your left leg's now fully hollow, and the right is almost done. The hollow's voice reached him louder than normal, but Ichigo couldn't care nor find any other emotion to perk interest in what was going on. His hope was gone. His caring nature was gone, as were any other things that made him Ichigo. I see. Well, I guess this is it. Do not give up, Ichigo. Don't worry, King. You're doing everything exactly right. Shiro cut over Zangetsu. Ichigo could sense a faint smirk from the hollow, but nothing more. Are you going to make me carry you everywhere? Suifeng's stern voice asked him as she let go of him. I was checking how long there was left. Emotionless and cold, the words made their way from Ichigo's mouth. A hint of the hollow, distorted voice was barely audible behind the words, but it was still there. Suifeng picked up on this, and deduced that the boy probably had about just over 30 minutes until he was done for. Nodding, Suifeng indicated for him to continue as they followed the trail of the strong, unknown spiritual pressure that was their enemy. It didn't take long to reach the source of Ryatsu. It had probably been 5 minutes due to the cave's elaborate design. Ichigo could sense the clashes of Ryatsu from the others, but had little care for it. The source of Ryatsu was behind an old wooden door. Ichigo reached for the handle, but the door swung open before his hand could grasp the corroding metal handle. Ichigo and Suifeng walked in. Both had their zanpakutos drawn ready for an attack. But no such attack hit them as they crept into the darkened room. There was little light. 2 sources of it were in the room. One hung freely from the roof, while the other was an eerie light pool of icy-looking water. In front of said pool was the thing they had been looking for, the Oni. I'm glad you could make it to my humble abode, the Oni said. It had no singular voice, but many. They all moaned and wailed when he spoke, echoing his words round the room. My name is Shikurai Akuma, but seeing how it's soon long, you can call me Shur. The entity that was the collection of voices stepped out from the shadows where it had been standing to reveal what could have been the personification of death itself. Shur had a black skeletal body that was shrouded in a loose black and smoky green cloak. His hood had been pulled down to reveal a hollowed face which blackened skin stretched over and was illuminated by plain green eyes. The rest of the face was how all the others looked, but worse. The lack of flesh left the angry expression pulled taut over all the features, making it look like it was about to rip open. The rotting bone tusks were sharpened to a point and attempted a smirk that the skin shouldn't have allowed. The figure held only a single slither of metal that glared a sickening green and yellow. I've come to take back what was mine, Ichigo demanded. He tried to keep his cool, but it felt like something was pushing him to get angry, and it wasn't the Oni. What is that I have taken which you miss so? You are darkness now, there is nothing more to want. Sure said, his eyes flickering into a cruel white. My soul! You stole my soul! Ichigo roared at him, taking deep calming breaths afterwards to quell his rage. But you still have your soul, do you not? You would be dead otherwise. Sure turned to the pool of water and seemed to coax something from it. Do you mean this? This disgusting light that will soon disappear? A white smoke wrapped itself round Sure's thin robe-covered arm. Voices sounded from the smoke, voices that were Ichigo's from the past. Of when he'd been there caring or protecting his friends and his family. One particular wispy voice stood out from the others. Give me your sword, Soul Reaper, was all the voice said, but Ichigo knew it was where it had all started. It was the night he met Rukia, and gained his Soul Reaper powers in order to save his family from the Hollow who'd been there for him. You Oni scum, your foolish ideals end here. Sui Feng yelled before shampooing at the Oni. She appeared right in front of him, but he appeared not to be fazed. Even as she raised her blade, Sure stood there staring down at her like she was no more than an annoyance. She brought her blade down on him, and it passed right through a cloud of smoke. Using Sui Feng's confusion, Sure appeared next to her. His sickly blade was raised, and he promptly stuck it through her gut. Lifting one of his bony legs, Sure kicked her just below the laceration, sending her crashing into the wall next to the luminous pool. Sui Feng crumpled to the ground, apparently out cold, and critically injured. How stupid! Shiro cackled out before Ichigo shoved him back down into his mind-quiet Shio. Ichigo gazed at Sui Feng's form on the floor. Empathy failed to stir in the recesses of Ichigo's soul, and he felt nothing but the dregs of rage for what it Sure had just done. Well, now that she'd gone, why don't we get down to business? Sure asked like nothing had happened. I want back my soul. Ichigo's voice was a monotone demand. We've been through this. We did you a favor by taking that part of your soul away. Sure smirked, again indicating to the pool where a white smoke clawed at the surface. I believe I need it. I assure you the light is not all that illuminating, nor is it necessary. Another smirk for Sure. Why? Because you can never escape darkness, it flocks to you always. Voices said around Sure without him moving his lips. That is not an answer. Why can I not have it? More rage crawled into Ichigo's voice as it became more hollowed by the second. It would be pointless. The darkness shall flock you always. It has always been in your heart and soul, Ichigo. Sure paused, then as a familiar unwanted presence settled over the Soul Society he smiled. He is free. Who took you everything you had? Who cannot die? He who shall bring the purity of darkness to everything, he shall strike down that thing, and we as well as Shinigami shall be free. Sure proclaimed as he glanced to the doorway. Two children stood there watching from the shadows, thinking they were hidden. How wrong they were. No! 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 Not him! Ichigo roared. I may be unable to kill him, but the pain he shall feel will be unimaginable. The fight for control was written over Ichigo's face, which was all hollow apart from the lack of mass that was currently forming. He soon regained his composure, but that reformation was about to be shattered. I believe we have some children who are playing hide and seek. I'll be a moment. Sure disappeared in a cloud of smoke and reappeared a moment later, grasping Akira and Kasumi by the neck, their eyes unfocused. I haven't told you about my ability, have I? Ichigo nodded. Akira and Kasumi's eyes became focused just in time for their endpoint. What would happen, dear Ichigo, if I were to show you how I can expend my power? How about on these two? Sure still had his grip on their necks, but something had stabbed into them. Then Ichigo saw it. Shadows broke through the front of their chests in the place where their hearts were. Blood poured out the wounds as the children began to die. Ichigo's rage filled the room. No, not just the room, but the whole cave. Everyone could feel it. Everyone feared it. Kasumi looked at Ichigo, a plea in her eyes. Don't. Angrino. Hollow. Kasumi coughed out before her gaze left his and lingered on Akira as they both fell to the floor limp and lifeless. The plea only quelled Ichigo's anger for a second, but their death toppled his resistance, making it weaker for only an instant. But it was just that instant that Shiro needed to take what was his. Looks like it's my time to shine. Shame your master was too weak to stop me, eh? Zangetsu? The Hollow looked down at the Zanpakuto he'd rendered unconscious only seconds beforehand. He was strong enough now, strong enough to bring Ichigo down. So he pulled Ichigo into the mindscape, stabbing him through the gut before the weakling knew what hit him. Ichigo crumbled to the floor of the sideways skyscraper, silent, for the moment. I'm sorry, King, but I'm fed up of being the horse. Your emotions make you weak. So weak I can easily squash out you and Zangetsu. Shiro cackled to the forms that lay in front of him. a smirk evident on his face. Everything had happened just how he expected. Ichigo had never realized, and now he was in control. Let's get this started, shall we? I haven't had a proper fight in ages. Shiro screeched, an insane smile creeping onto his ice-white face as he covered it with his mask. Oh yes, you're not going to ask me for this back anymore then? Shiro gestured to the light, which was still clawing at the surface of the ever-darkening pool. I won't need to ask, cause you'll be dead, Shiro sneered. The thing the Oni held wasn't just Ichigo's emotions. It was also his power. If he could get that power, no one could stop him. He would be invincible. Except against one man, but that wouldn't matter. He would get stronger. What was the rush? People may die in the time it took, but who cares? Shiro certainly didn't. A challenge against death itself? The darkness shall show you how blind you are. Shiro chortled, happiness dancing in his eyes. He turned towards the pool and began chanting and murmuring words that were illegible to Shiro. While the chanting commenced, wisps of darkness crawled out of the pool, clawing the ground as they did so. They had no proper form and appeared fragile, but Shiro wasn't finished as he kept on chanting. The obedient darkness started to creep towards Akira and Kasumi's dead forms that should have already disintegrated. Something was preventing them from doing so. When the shadows reached the bodies, they climbed into them, through the hole where their heart was. It took only a second before the puppet bodies were up. No blood poured from their wound, as there was nothing left to bleed. What they had bled lay on the floor beneath the shadows of Akira and Kasumi. None of it fazed Shiro. He was a hollow and he had no heart. Why would he give a damn about Ichigo's friends? He didn't even stop himself when the newly risen bodies called to Ichigo. Ichigo? Why are you killing us? Kasumi's dead voice whispered. Didn't we help you, Ichigo? And this is how you repay us? Akira mock slurred, attempting to put of Ichigo. It failed to have the effect Shiro wanted. Shiro simply cut down the moving lumps of flesh that had once been alive and strolled over their now headless bodies. They won't be getting up any time soon. In quick succession, Shiro appeared before the Oni and shoved the giant cleaver into its chest. Nothing happened. The blade cut through nothing, and the illusion of Shiro disappeared into wisps of smoke that retreated back to the water. They were tainted, as are you, a voice whispered from the shadows. You and all others are tainted. The stains shall never wash out. The sun will never shine upon you all again. Tainted, broken little toys. Shiro turned, and Shiro was leaning on the wall, a smile stretched across his face. Shiro smiled as he looked back at the pool of water. The light of his power was there, and now he could take it. He was about to go and grab it when someone interfered. Ichigo. No! You can't have it! It's my body! I won't let you! The mask on Shiro's face began to crack. Damn that Ichigo, he wasn't about to let him ruin it for him now. Bringing his hand to his face like Ichigo had done so many times before him, he repaired the mask. A quick low-level sandio, and he was at the pool. Without thinking, Shiro shoved his beastly hand into the pool. No! Shiro screeched, you fool! Do not taint the dead water with the light that clings to you. I don't give shit to what you think. Shiro snarled over his shoulder. His hand felt cold in the water. The things that swirled in it started to seep into his skin, sending chills up his arm. His arm prevailed as it reached the center. He grasped at the white mist that was his, and it too seeped into his skin. He was done here. Now was the time to leave, and now was the time to get strong. He'd acquired more power than he had intended, power that he had to learn to control. Standing upright, he casually flicked his hand up and down, opening a garganta. Shiro looked up to see the seven who had accompanied Ichigo here on the now pointless mission burst through the old wooden door. He knew what their orders would be, and he had no intention of dying just yet. It will not matter what you do, Ichigo. Eisen-sama has regained all of his powers. And his first target is the seireitei, then it shall be the world of the living where he will finish what he started. Shiro hissed, before leaving in a pool of black tar that sunk into the ground. We will meet again, Ichigo, and when we do you will be grateful to have me wipe you from existence. I wouldn't bother. Shiro yawned to those who were left. You just heard what it said, right? Looks like you best go crawling back to your beloved seireitei before it's gone. You won't be able to catch me anyway. They had little time to reach before Shiro jumped into the garganta and closed it instantly, so they couldn't even try to follow. As he ran to Hueco Mundo, he smirked at the thought of their faces. They looked so devoid of hope, it cracked Shiro up. They were just like Ichigo, weak and dependent on their emotions, which only ever got the better of them. How pitiful! After running for ages, Shiro finally made it to the permanent night that was Hueco Mundo. The sand stretched out as far as the eye could see, and if he listened carefully, Shiro could hear the roars of hollows in the distance. Night was now his domain, and those who shared it would bow down to the new king. T-Hollow infected sand was to be his home now, his new kingdom. Time to greet the neighbors and make them his subjects. It was time to feed again. The others used to taste sweeter. Now they barely satisfied his hunger. He knew he'd have to move on to something more satisfying soon. But this barren desert land had little to offer. Sighing, Shiro got up from his throne carved from the leftovers of other hollows. It was time to get another meal, probably his last intentional hollow meal. Afterwards he'd have to move on, and he had a few targets in mind. Ichigo wouldn't miss them. He and Zangetsu were too busy playing dead in the mindscape. They hadn't woken since he'd left the Oni's cave. Not that he was complaining, he liked the silence their incapacitated state brought him. Shiro sonitoed down to the Minos forest, ready to have the usual satisfying meal. None of the hollows dared attack him as he made his way down to the forest, nor when he got there. They'd learnt long ago that he was the king, and they'd learnt the hard way. He wasn't sure how long it had been, but his power had grown profusely since moving to Hueco Mundo. He'd consumed many hollows on his first day, mainly out of celebration but also for the power. They'd been sweet and had rapidly increased his power at first, but now not even the Jillian quelled his growing hunger. But they were the only food source that there were many of. There were few ajuches left. He'd eaten them all and others had yet to replace them. As for the Vasto Lord, well, he'd only ever seen one and he'd eaten him too. The battle hadn't been long but nonetheless, it had entertained Shiro. He could see their masks now, a collection of souls glowing in the darkness. His mouth watered, hungry for the sensation of tearing into flesh with his sharpened teeth. He used to take off his mask when he ate, but now the thing was fused to his face, and he wasn't ready to pull it off yet. He had to get stronger. He jumped onto the back of the Minos and began eating. The outer flesh of a Minos was tough, but when it was broken though, the rest was soft and stringy. The blood that coated it made it taste all the better for Shiro's bloodthirsty appetite. The meat itself had a tangy taste with just a touch of sweetness. Before it would have been all sweetness. The sweetness was what got hollows hooked and combined with their painful hunger and made them all relentless in their hunt for souls. Too soon did the Minos disappear as it became part of him, and Shiro had to move on to the next one. He continued like that for a long time and still the hunger was not quelled. In fact, it seemed to become more violent. He needed more. His face was covered in the blood of those he had eaten as he got up from his position on the ground. There was no need to wipe it off. He liked the sensation he brought him. The sensation that he could still feel something and wasn't just a mindless beast consumed by a lust for souls, even if he was a hollow. He smirked. Looks like he was more human than he thought. Before him stood many of the standard hollows he saw daily. They would always come to stand before him, hoping to either consume him or be consumed by him. Occasionally one would share some knowledge to him. Most of the time it was a load of bullshit, but in rare cases the knowledge would be worthwhile. Today was such a day. Yes? Shiro's masked face stretched into a smirk as the purple hollow stepped forward, apparently with some news. Because we think y'all called to have been a Shinigami before the purple hollow was cut off when a Vasto Lord appeared in front of it. The Vasto Lord was small just like all the others. It was also female, which was rare. Not many females managed to get that far along in evolution. She was around the same size as him, possibly a little shorter, and her whole body was covered in silver scales that sparkled whenever the light hit them. Her hair was pure white that was cut into a long pixie haircut with silver swept-back horns growing out her head. A mask was welded to her face that framed her eyes and covered her mouth with large sharpened teeth. Giant silver dragon-like wings swelled from her back, almost touching the floor with their bone-like spikes. To top it off, a black bone skirt was welded to her hips with a long black tail drooping to the floor. Her arms were crossed over the hollow hole that was on her stomach, and she glared up at Shiro with piercing black eyes. She looked mad. They'd all be able to talk a lot better if you could control your spiritual pressure. Then maybe you'd get more news. The airy but demanding voice floated through the air, sending chills up Shiro's spine. TCH, he was never good at that. Looks like I'm just as bad. Shiro muttered as he attempted to suppress his Ryatsu. It was more work than he thought as he realized his Ryatsu was now double a captain's. I take it you mean your Shinigami half? She smirked. It's not like it's a secret. What do you want anyway? He sneered as he stalked over to her, drawing Zangetsu off his back, ready to fight if needed. I'm not here to fight. Geez, please tell me you're more than just basic instincts. Sarcasm laced her airy voice. I'll convey the news to you that the others were attempting to. She glanced at the other, lower-ranked hollow and indicated that they should go. Without needed to be told twice, they all quickly skulked away, back into the recesses of the forest. And that new would be, Chia, she supplied. Right, Chia, the news, he prompted. The Soul Society has fallen, so Eisen has either killed all the captains, locked them away, or they have fled, Chia said with a smirk. How interesting, Shiro said sarcastically, clearly uninterested. Bet it? He plans to attack the world of the living. I thought you might want to know, seeing how there'll be many souls to eat in the panic. Another smirk, one filled with the same bloodlust he felt when his hunger was left to its own devices. Why, how interesting, you asking me to join? Only if you want to. It would be best to go now, though. The humans' final stand is starting. I suppose it'll be fun. I have been feeling a little peckish lately, maybe a little homesick too. Shiro grinned as Chia opened a Garganta to Katakura town. Will you give me the pleasure of knowing your name? Chia asked in mock politeness. It's nice to know another Vasto Lord, as much as we like being alone. Shiro Zangetsu. Nice, time to go. Don't want to miss all the fun. Chia jumped into the Garganta and Shrio followed. As he ran, Shrio debated who his first targets would be. Ichigo's family? Especially the old man who had been a captain. The amount of spiritual pressure would be huge and so satisfying. But then there were Ichigo's other friends. They all had their own abnormal but none the less tasty spiritual pressure. Maybe he'd take trinkets to show the former king later, if he was awake. Then there was Chia. He was surprised another Vasto Lord was still around, not that he wasn't grateful for the company, which he was. But most were dead, and well, the few that there were either worked alone or hated him. Knowing his and Ichigo's luck, however, this newfound companionship could go in two drastic directions. One would be that she dies, while the other was that they became friends. The word felt wrong. Hollows didn't make friends. It wasn't how things worked, but then again he was a different case. Seemed like he had one thing in common with Ichigo. People just seemed to flock around him like they had Ichigo. How tragic. Chia, who had been flying over her perfectly built path, suddenly descended in front, or Shrio causing him to crash into her. A little warning would be nice, Chia. He scowled at her now folded up wings. Oh, I'm stopping. She called in a mock warning, still staring though the whole of the Garganta. What's wrong? Shiro couldn't see what she was staring at, but whatever it was seemed to be affecting her somehow. Nothing, just children burning, Chia answered nonchalantly before resuming a slow-paced walk into the world of the living. I see, you ready, or do you need a minute? He teased. Why would I care about human children burning? I was merely checking for enemies. Idiot! Chia's airy voice screeched at him, making him wince at the highness her voice had reached. TCH, let's just get on with this. I have many targets in mind. All with lots of power. A grin spread onto his mask Oswell as her sharp teeth drawing themselves up into a similar grin. Other than the grin, Chia had no comment to make as they exited the black void of the Garganta. But he had not been prepared for what he was about to see. It didn't shock him as such, but it shocked his soul, which recognized this place as home. Buildings were on fire. People lay dead on the floor while others screamed over their lost ones. They could see a few that were standing in the sky battling to save the town. Stupid, they have no chance of saving the town. It is lost, Shiro thought into the still silent mindscape. He searched for the familiar spiritual pressures of Ichigo's family and friends. He soon found them, and he along with Chia headed for Urahara's shop, where they all hid. It also seemed that luck was on his side. Urahara and Tasai weren't in. This was going to be one very satisfying meal. When Shrio had gone, it all fell apart. The mentally defeated captains made their way back to the Soul Society quickly. There was urgent news to tell. Not just about Kurosaki, but about Eisen. They'd got back just in time. Just in time to see the seireitei fall. Just in time to see Yamamoto killed by the man they believed locked away. The old man had released his bankai, but no one had seen it. They'd all been dead or too far away to see it. Eisen had an army of the Oni with him this time. They'd always been his backup after the Arankars. Many of them were stronger than the Arankars before them. The buildings burned, and all they could do was watch. There would be no point in them attempting to stop Eisen right then. They'd all die, and it would be a pointless sacrifice. It was a hard choice, but they had to make it. They had to prepare a final stand where they knew Eisen would go next. Turning their backs on what they'd sworn to protect, the captains and lieutenants left the Soul Society. Kenpachi carried the still unconscious Suifeng's body as well as the normal weight of Ichiro. His only regret was that he hadn't been able to fight the new Ichigo. They stepped into the Senkamen, leaving the screams and cries for help behind them. Eisen had shown no mercy to any Soul Reapers, not even those who had surrendered. Those he simply cut down as he strolled through the streets of the seireitei. The once pure whiteness of the Soul Society was tainted as the streets ran red with blood. How would they ever recover from this? Blinding whiteness surrounded them as the screams faded away, and they made their way to Katakura. Once in Katakura, they meet up with Urahara, in hopes he would aid them. They told him everything, The news of Kurosaki and Eisen. The shop owner merely nodded and sent Yoruchi to gather Ichigo's friends and family. When the news had been told, Ichigo's friends were overcome by a numbness they couldn't describe. They never thought it possible. They never would have thought Ichigo could lose to the hollow. His sisters, who'd grown used to the fact that hollows and shinigami existed, were the first to cry, soon followed by Orihime, who'd begun to comfort them. The rest of his friends who possessed spiritual awareness had mixed reactions. Some shed a few tears while others stood statically still, not believing what had happened. But they all had determination in their eyes. They would take down Eisen, then save Ichigo from his hollow. It was ludicrous to think they could take down a man that was immortal, but that didn't stop them. It was the only thing driving them forwards. Driving through the grief of losing so many people to a man they believed gone for good. They knew he would attack, but when was another matter. So they had to be ready at all times. Sui Feng had made a full recovery thanks to Orihime's healing and was now helping to train everyone in Hakuda and Hoho. Months had passed. It was October when Eisen attacked. They were ready for him. They knew he wouldn't be as strong as last time due to the Hogyoku rejecting him, but that didn't make them feel any better. Ichigo's friends were told to all stay in Urahara's basement. Only a few listened. Chad and Ishida left to fight in hopes of avenging Ichigo, who'd lost himself to his hollow because of Eisen. Orihime and the others stayed, not knowing that they were a prime target for two hungry hollows. One they would recognize. The battle outside was bloody. Those who could fight for Katakura were vastly outnumbered. By the time Eisen arrived, they were too exhausted to deal with the Oni he had brought with him. But they had no choice, and thus they continued their pointless battle that even they knew they wouldn't win. They knew all was lost to them when the blood from their wounds didn't stop. They'd failed. Taken down and out by numerous Onis, likes of which they'd never seen before. When the presence of Ichigo's sisters and friends disappeared, they knew there was no hope left. They'd been defeated, and everyone they knew had been wiped out in an instant. They were about to surrender when familiar colored hair went charging at the reason everything was gone. Nobody noticed Shiro and Chie as they ran towards the collection of spiritual beings. That was all thanks to Chie's ability to shield spiritual pressure from being detected. But as they walked through town, they found the streets were bare. Nobody was outside, not even cats, dogs, or birds dared to stroll around in a battle zone. Shiro noticed that lack of pillars that had been used to switch the fake Katakura with the real one last time Eisen attacked. That must mean there were still people here. Shiro smirked, more to eat after his first meal. So how do you know about these people? His new companion asked, her airy voice floating towards him from behind. Well, he smirked, I think I'll tell you later, over a nice campfire. There are no campfires in Hueco Mundo. Chia said. I wasn't being literal, Chia. I know, Chia said, giggling. TCH. Shiro found it hard to find Chia irritating. In the short time he'd known her, she'd grown on him. She had a relatively understanding air about her. She'd become a great Arankar, if they ever managed to evolve that far. It was also the twinkle in her eyes. There was the same bloodlust there that he had, but there was also something else, something he had yet to identify, let alone understand. They arrived outside the familiar shop. The air was thick with the sweet taste of Ryatsu, sending shivers down the spines of both Vasto lords. There would be no stopping them now. They'd smelt and tasted the Ryatsu that was in the air, and it, like a drug, had intoxicated them. Boy, you sure know how to hunt. Chia purred, clearly happy about the easy hunt. TCH, you're so easily pleased, Shiro called as he kicked open the paper-thin entrance. They strolled through the now open entranceway and towards the back of the shop. At the back they found the trapdoor to the basement of the shop and their meal. Smirking at each other, the hungry Vasto lords climbed through, and unable to stop themselves they had a race down the stairs. Shiro won, thanks to Ichigo, who'd been a pretty good at Shunpa. Chia hadn't been too far behind her, so he waited for her. They didn't have to look far for their meal. In fact, they didn't have to look at all. The group of people who were to be their meal were camped just in front of the stairs and were obviously frozen with terror. Shiro recognized everyone in the group. There were some of Ichigo's friends at school. He didn't care for their names. Then there was Orihime, Ichigo's sisters, Rukia, and the kids that worked with Urahara. Rukia was the first to step forwards, ushering everyone behind her as she drew her Zanpakuto. The two hollows looked at her, then at each other, and then proceeded to laugh at the pitiful soul reaper before them. Rukia-chan, we all know that won't stop us, Shiro taunted. Stay, wait, how do you know my name? Rukia demanded, clearly confused, which was when Orihime spoke up. KK Kurosaki KK-kun? She stuttered, recognizing the form of Ichigo's hollow. Shock crept over the faces of everyone, who seemed to relax a bit. They thought Ichigo would never hurt them. He was a brother, a friend, and a savior. Hurting those he loved wasn't Ichigo. But how wrong they were. Ichigo was no longer here. Well, if you want to call me that, to go on, won't make it any easier. Shirk smirked as he watched the shocked faces crumble into fear from his words. You know these guys, Shiro-chan? Chia asked from behind him. Me? Personally I don't, but that can't be said for my old self though. Shiro paused. You ready to eat, Chia-chan? I'll always be ready to eat. Which ones are you having, or is it a free-for-all? Grinned the hungry Vasto. Free-for-all, yelled Shiro before the whole place turned into a screamfest. The grinning hollows jumped forwards at their prey. Nothing would get in the way, not even the fact Ichigo was still inside the hollow. Said Soul Reaper was still out for the count, but when he awoke the nightmares he'd have would haunt him for the rest of his life. Everyone knew that hollows went for their families in order to fill the hole and pain that came with being a hollow. If only Urahara and others had remembered that, maybe Ichigo's friends wouldn't have been put through the pain that came with being eaten. Shiro went for Rukia first. The Reaper was no match for him. She didn't even have time to go into Shirk-eye before his hand went straight through her gut, and his jaw clamped onto her shoulder. He bit down hard, making her scream in pain as he ripped at the flesh which was her shoulder. The screaming only made it more fun for the sadistic hollows. Shiro pinned the whimpering Rukia as he cackled, high on the spiritual pressure he was consuming. As he continued to bit and nibble at flesh, blood covering his face and drenching Rukia, Chia was eating both the kids that helped out Urahara. Both kids were on the floor, one held down by her tail, the other by her hands. She ate the boy Jinta first. He was in a bloodied state. One arm had been torn to shreds, leaving him barely conscious while Chia mauled at the kid's stomach. The puddle of blood around Jinta tainted Chia's scales, but she didn't care. She continued to bite and pull at the stringy sinew which connected flesh to bone, and when she was satisfied that the boy's soul was gone, she repeated the sum on Yururu. After Yururu, Chia found the twin sisters. They hadn't put up much of a fight, nor did they last long. Their childish screams and cries pleaded to her to stop, but they fell on deaf ears. Soon the cries were silenced as the girls died, their soul gone. They died holding hands in an attempt to comfort each other, as their life was eaten away. The others had been screaming at them to stop. But when they realized that words would not reach them, they ran for the exit, only to be stopped by an invisible force. Shiro looked up from the disappearing form of Rukia. A bloodied smirk spread over his face. Chia had put up a barrier to stop their food from escaping. Shiro, who'd finished his first meal, went for one of Ichigo's school friends, the one he'd always punched in the face. The guy's screams soon faded as he no longer had the ability to scream when Shiro ripped out his throat. Only gurgles filled with blood came out as Shiro continued to consume the muscle and flesh of Ichigo's friend. While the Vasto Lord continued to feed, Tatsuki took her chance to take a swipe at the hollow who'd once been Ichigo. She ignored the warnings of the other three that it would end badly as she ran towards the beast that was ravaging Kigo's body. Before she managed to even get halfway to the white beast, the female hollow came slamming into her, ripping her arm off in the process. She screamed, but the only people who could hear her screams were those who were soon to be eaten too. She cried out to them, even if it was futile. Run! Tatsuki's voice was a blood-filled yell. Tears filled their eyes as they began to run away from the horrific sights of their friends being eaten by someone they used to know. The screams and sounds of ripping flesh echoed all around them as they ran deeper into the cave. They knew their running was futile, but there could be the hope that someone would save them. That hope was soon torn away. Once Shiro and Chia had finished Kigo and Tatsuki, they'd moved on to Chizuru and Mizuruo. While the tearing of flesh and their lifeblood poured to the floor, Oriheim sat against a rock hugging her knees. All her friends were dead. Their smell of their blood polluted the air. Everything was gone. What was the point in defeating Eisen now? Everything they were all fighting for had been consumed, and she was all that was left. She sobbed, and that sobbing got the attention of Shiro. The white monster turned to her, his face caked in the blood of her friends. The hair that had been Ichigo's had been dyed red, leaving no trace of Ichigo behind. They'd known long ago that he'd gone completely hollow. Everyone had cried at his loss. Then Eisen had arrived, and the possibility that he could appear had been forgotten. Now they were paying for it. Shiro stalked towards her, his twisted yellow eyes staring into her soul, hungry and with no compassion at all. When he was in front of her, he didn't stop at all. He only slowed his movements. Crouching slowly, he leaned forwards towards her shoulder. She caught his eye for an instant, and his mask pulled into a maniacal grin before he bit down. She screamed until her voice failed her as the hollow began eating. When she couldn't scream, she began to cry, and that crying is what awoke someone who'd been sleeping for a long time. Oriheim looked up when she heard that voice. The voice of the man she'd fallen for so long ago. The voice that belonged to someone so kind and selfless. A voice she was happy to hear before she died, even if it was at his hands. Orihime? Tears poured out from the mask, from the brown eyes of Ichigo. What have? Kurosaki-kun, Orihime's weak gurgled voice cut over him, tears falling down her blood-covered face. She smiled as her last words escaped her. I went to say something before I go. I love you, Kurosaki. The smile faded as Orihime's soul was absorbed into Ichigo's hollow body. Tears continued to fall from the mask as Ichigo wept over all those that he'd eaten. How could he? He'd failed to protect everyone. He could feel them all now. They were all fading as the enemy overwhelmed them. He clutched Orihime's cold body before laying it down on the floor. As he crouched over the limp form of her body, a hand came down on his shoulder. He knew who it was. Even if he had been unconscious, he could vividly see what his hollow had been doing. It was the woman he'd met before coming here. What was her name? Chie, that was it. Her name was Chie. Shiro? A shaken, airy voice whispered. I'm not him, Ichigo said, turning Chie. Her eyes were filled with regret, but there was something else that was different. Her appearance had changed. She was no longer covered in scales, nor did she have a tail or a pair of wings. In fact, most of her mask was gone. She had become an Arankar. A piece of white bone clung to the side of her face, framing her eyes as it swept back into a horn that used to be there. She was wearing a torn white outfit that barely covered her torso and hips but was enough to preserve her dignity. Not that it was the first thing on her mind. I can't believe I did that, she cried as tears formed in her no longer sparkling silver eyes. We both didn't, Ichigo said as he got up, giving her a comforting hug. I think we should give them a proper burial. Yes. I'm so sorry, they were your friends and family and I helped kill them. Ichigo cut her off. He knew it wasn't her fault. They'd been mindless, but he could feel it now. He too was becoming an Arankar. Gently his push her always so she wouldn't be crushed by his spiritual pressure that was rapidly changing his body. As it did so, Ichigo paid a visit to his mindscape. You got anything to say for yourself, Shiro? Ichigo yelled at the white hollow that was currently pinned down by Zangetsu. I was a mindless beast. You have to understand. But I advise you move. The hollow's voice was different. No longer was it the sound of two but now the sound of one, and it sounded very sincere. What do you mean stand back? Ichigo asked as the hollow began to glow faintly. I'm evolving, remember? That means a resurrection is coming. Suddenly Zangetsu jumped of the hollow as a white light enveloped Shiro. Inside the light, Ichigo and Zangetsu could see two figures forming. When the light cleared, they recognized the form of Shiro, who had long white hair with a black horn from part of his mask attached to it. He was still wearing his white shihakusho, but on his hip was an empty black sheath. The other figure looked similar to Tensa Zangetsu. There were black furry cuffs on the long white robe which he wore. Short white hair fell to its shoulders as clawed hands swept through it. His eyes stared at Ichigo and Zangetsu in a curious manner, as if he hadn't expected them to be there. The eyes were black with white irises and had a twinkle to them just like Tensa's. I am Luna Nueva *, your hollow resurrection. As unexpected as you may be, my power is yours should you ever need it. You need only say glare, Luna Nueva. To use me, the young voice called to him. They were too shocked to do anything. Hollows may be mindless beasts, but what they'd done was beyond that of a beast. It was that of a monster from hell. Hollows never went for the living, yet they had done so. Chie was probably the most distraught. She hadn't even known any of them, but it was proof that she had evolved. They both had, but at a price. Around the cavern lay 7 bodies, or what remained of them. Most of them had been ripped to shreds, far beyond recognition, and one was missing. Rukia's. Because she was a spiritual being, her body had disappeared when Shiro had eaten her. Only blood remained of her now. Look, there's nothing you could have done about it. It took time for your soul to repair itself, said Arankar called from his mindscape. What months? He roared back at the newly formed Arankar. Ichigo thought it best to ignore them for a while. Right now he needed to come to terms with what had happened. What he had allowed to happen. He looked at Chie, who was currently bent over his sister's bodies, trying to look for any sign of life. She'd said to him that she'd always loved children, that they always seemed to find a way into her heart and bring her joy. She assumed that when she was human she'd either had children or been a nanny of some sort. After some time the pale-skinned Arankar got up and materialized a barrier. Using the barrier she scooped up the twins and the others, then brought them to where Ichigo stood in front of Orihime's body. She said nothing as they were gently placed in a line next to Orihime. They stared at the corpses for what seemed like a long time. Deep regret made its way into their hearts, a regret that would never leave them and one they would never live down. What now? Chie's shaky voice asked. We give them a burial. I will bury my sisters, Ichigo said to her, turning away before she could see the tears that formed in his eyes and ran down his face. They didn't speak as they dug the graves. The only sound that could be heard was the moving of soil with the spades made from spiritual pressure. Soon the graves were deep enough and they started placing the dead in each of their graves. Rukia's was left empty. Before filling them in, Ichigo and Chie made headstones. Each one had different elaborate designs that Ichigo dictated to Chie as she carved them. Not wanting to leave Rukia's grave empty, Ichigo threw in a Chappie the rabbit's soul candy device. They filled Rukia's grave in first. The gentle thud of dirt echoed as the reality hit them. When the grave was filled and the headstone was placed at its head, and the same action was repeated for all of them. When it was all done, Ichigo sat before his sisters' graves and began talking to them, apologizing for not being able to protect them properly, which he then passed on to all the graves before him. Chie left him alone. She hadn't known these humans like he had, and her input would end up being insensitive. Looking down, Chie opened her hand that had been closed since burying the girl Oriheim. She didn't know why, but something inside her had compelled her to remove the girl's hairpins. She had to admit there was a strange power about them, even though their wielder had died. Sighing, she hoped that he would be finished soon. Not that he shouldn't mourn, but now was not the time. Someone was bound to show up soon, and Chie had no intention of being unprepared for that fight. When it came down to it, Ichigo wasn't at fault for the lives lost today. Someone else was, and she would avenge those she'd killed. It felt like the right thing to do, and a voice inside her agreed. When she turned into an Aaronkar, a voice had called to her, the voice of her now sealed hollow powers. The snake-like female voice had said if she ever needed her power, all she had to do was call out strike, Culebra. Chie hadn't heard the voice since, but had received a sword that was sheathed in a silver case with a guard that had two symmetrical sides. Both were a starburst black to white, and knotted together at the blade of the sword. The design appeared to be of Celtic origin, but Chie knew little of what it meant. Bending down to the rock where she'd stowed her blade, Chie picked it up. Just as she did so, the boy who was supposed to be Shiryo called to her. Chie? He called from where the graves were. Yes? She walked round the rock in a shy manner, not sure if he was going to yell and rant at her for eating his friends. I don't think I properly introduced myself. I'm Ichigo Kurosaki, the still now pink-skinned Aaronkar said. His eyes were red from the crying, but Chie understood. They may have few feelings, but the pain of loss still cut the deep like it would any other being. I see. I am Chie. So where is the Shiro I previously knew? She asked, staring into brown eyes that were too warm for a hollow. Ones that had been such a cruel yellow only moments ago. He's around, he paused. I suppose you could see him if you want. I need to talk to him and the others anyway. It would be nice to say goodbye to him. Ichigo gave her a questioning look. Well, you're in charge now, aren't you? So he'd unlikely to be appearing anytime soon. I suppose you're right. He shut his eyes momentarily in concentration. Okay guys, out you come. Gently, spirit particles started from the ground and began building upwards 3 different bodies. One was that of a Zanpakuto, an old man clad in black and wearing sunglasses. The other Chie sensed was a resurrection. He was young and had white hair with a body clad in white and black fur at the wrists, just like Shiro did. The last figure was one Chie recognized instantly. It was Shiro. He was a reverse double of Ichigo. His hair was long and white, and he wore a white shihakusho. The one thing that had changed was the eyes. No longer were they a cruel yellow and black, but were now warm rubies that were currently burning with sorrow and remorse. But when she looked at all the spirits, she noticed the same thing. Their master may seem unfazed, but they all voiced the pain and loss he felt. Chie, this is Zangetsu, he indicated to the man in black. Shiro, you already know. Shiryo gave her a nervous grin, and Luna Nueva. But we call him Shingetsu most of the time. Ichigo indicated to the young white-haired man. So you have 3 spirits inside you? Must get noisy. It sure does, they just never shut up. Ichigo said, faking anger at said spirits. Come on, Kingi, we aren't that bad, Shiro said in defense before addressing Chie. Yo, Chie, hey Shiraya. She yelled at him before she pounced, slapping him and then pulling him into a crushing hug. What was that for? Shiryo scowled while he patted her awkwardly on the back. For bringing us here, you idiot. Look what you caused. She screamed at him. I know, was all the albino had to say, his head hung in shame. Do not worry. We have been through this with him. He was a beast and also under the influence of someone we need to rid this world of. Wise words made their way from the young boy, his smooth voice ridding the air of its tension. Chie let go of Shiro's shoulders, then gazed at Ichigo. The orange-haired boy knew what was coming and slowly began to back away. Don't run away, Ichigo. I only want to give you a hug. Chie called as she chased him round the training room. That's why I'm running. The terrified Ichigo screamed, You almost crushed Shiryo. No way am I having that done too. Ichigo's three spirits could only watch in amusement as their master, one of the strongest Shinigami Arankar ever, a man who'd faced down an army of Arankar and the whole Soul Society run from a woman. The very idea was ludicrous, but here it was happening right in front of them, and while it did, the weight of sorrow was lifted from their shoulders because Ichigo was moving forwards. They knew he wouldn't forget and that he would never heal from the mental wounds. But there was hope that he would overcome it all. Got you! Chie squealed as she appeared in front of the spirits, clutching a struggling Ichigo. Gah! Was all Ichigo could voice before Chie gave him a crushing hug for no apparent reason. Don't worry, Ichigo, I'll look after you. You won't be alone ever. Chie whispered in his ear before she continued crushing him. Thanks, guys. Just because she's a girl doesn't mean you can't lend me a hand. Unable to contain their laughter anymore, the three spirits burst into hysterics, only upsetting their master more. Today the newly reformed Shiro and Chie had gained an understanding of morality. Their minds were now clear from the overbearing hunger that had possessed them as Vasto Lords, and they wanted to know how it had gotten so out of control. Vasto Lords, regardless of them being hollow, had a certain degree of principles that separated them from the others. But that seemed to have left them the moment they had met. Perhaps someone had planted a suggestion long before that, or someone had planted it when they met. It didn't matter when only Hu and Ichigo had an idea of who it may have been, even if he had been asleep. Have you recovered, Ichigo? The wise Zanpakuto smirked, clearly amused by his master's helplessness. Yeah, I guess we should all be making a plan now? Ichigo asked his spirits and Chie. I suppose the least I could do is help you. Chie chipped in nonchalantly. What do you want to do? Nueva asked from his position between Zangetsu and Shiro. We need to deal with Eisen. Both Chie and Ichigo said. How'd you plan on doing that, King? Shiro asked as he touched the tip of the only horn on his head. One Ichigo also had. Ichigo may have regained control, but he was still more hollow than Soul Reaper. He had a hole in his chest, a fractured mask on the left side of his head, and half of his Shihakusho was white while the other half was Shinigami black. I should be able to take him down with my resurrection and Bankai. He'd weaker than before, and you will have my aid in this, Chie said, cutting him off as she gave him a familiar hairpin, for luck. I have a feeling it will be useful. How did you get these? As the words left Ichigo's mouth, the other's sweat dropped at his stupidity. You're seriously asking that question? We all know where she got them from, Shiro cackled. I know that, I just mean why. I'm not sure on that, just seemed like we might need them. The power is still there, Chie said dreamily. I think we should continue with making a plan, Ichigo. I sense a familiar presence on its way, the Zanpakuto said as he glanced to his left. I just assumed that, Ichigo began. You'd go charging in and cut down anyone in your path? Nueva supplied. Yeah, I suppose that was it. Seriously? After all the battles you guys have been in, all you do is dive in? Chie queried, her eyebrow clearly twitching in annoyance. Well, King never thought of the plans, the others did. Looks like I'll be the one thinking of it this time. Chilled the dragon-like woman, unimpressed by their hack-and-slash tactics. They said nothing, only nodding in agreement. Good, well, I suggest that we set up a barrier around the fight. We don't want others interrupting. She paused. Then I suppose I can set some kind of explosions off where his army is, making them easier to deal with later. The only thing at getting to Eisen undetected. At that she looked to Ichigo and his spirits for help. Only one had the answer. We could send Trio off as a decoy. He looks exactly like Ichigo from a distance, and can easily disappear by being dematerialized. A wise comment from a wise Zanpakuto. The only objector to his idea was the decoy. No way. I don't want to be chased all over town by Oni. I may not die, but it still hurts to be hacked at, you know. Shiro growled, only to be silenced by his resurrection. If you don't do this, then you shall be chased by much worse than Oni. Me, Nueva roared, hitting Shiro round the head with his down sheath. So are we all happy with the plan? Chie asked as they nodded. As for your spiritual pressure, I can put a cloak on you. You won't need to worry about that. All of his spiritual pressure will appear to be with Shiro. We done now? An irritated Ichigo asked, desperate to go kill the man who turned him into a monster. No! You are not done! A collection of familiar voices thundered around the room. It was sure. Ichigo turned, his spirits dematerialized, and anger raged through his bloody ruby eyes. It was the man who'd as good as killed his family. He was no better than Eisen, and then it hit Ichigo. Neither was he. After all, he'd killed his people he and others cared for. But now was not the time to think of that. Now was the time to deal with one of the instigators. Sure, you You're the one who started all of this. He gestured to the graves behind him. Me? Why, it was all your own doing, Ichigo. The embodiment of death smiled. I've come to deal with you. I'm sure you'll thank me for it after all you have done such hurtful things. Those that know you shall rejoice in your death. As he spoke, a screen flickered into existence, followed by at least half a dozen more. On each of them a moving image of someone Ichigo knew was fighting for those they believed still alive. The barrier Chia had put up mimicked their spiritual pressure, and until they left it would stay there. That doesn't matter. If I die, Eisen shall go down with me. No one shall be hurt by him, or me, again. Ichigo charged at Shur, ready to try out his new powers. Shur deflected Ichigo's attack with a wall of familiar shadows. All that you love shall become shadow. All that you see shall become death. Shur whispered, and shadows began to pool at his feet. The pools ran upwards, creating skeletal forms which were eventually covered in skin and then took their final form. They were those they'd just buried. It was a cruel trick to make Ichigo will less to fight. The trick was working until Chia's airy voice snarled at Shur, what a cheap trick. Don't worry, Ichigo, the people who loved you wouldn't come back. They're in you now, not with this bastard. Why, Ichigo? Why'd you kill us? Weren't you our friend? Our brother? Our protector? The forms wailed, their icy voices freezing Ichigo's resolve. Che, Ichigo, after all of this you're going to get taken down by some half-built replicas. You're right. Chia, you get these. He gestured to the replicas. I'll get Shur. Using the familiar giant cleaver, Ichigo flash-stepped behind Shur and brought the blade down. The attack clipped Shur's shoulder before being deflected out by a swell of shadows. The Oni turned and slashed forwards with the green and black smoky blade in quick succession. With his improved speed, Ichigo managed to block the blow, pushing the Oni backwards. You can never escape the darkness. It flocks to you always, and all that you are shall die. Shur called, his body covered in shadows before disappearing. He appeared behind Ichigo, intent on catching his by surprise, but Ichigo was ready for him and ducked out the way. They continued trading blows for a short time. Shur showed no other abilities, and Chia remained back by the graves, beating down the last of the wispy forms. Her expression was cold and emotionless, as if she didn't care, but the tears rolling down her cheeks said otherwise. Why do you continue? It would be easier if you were to accept your fate. Screamed Shur. Because I can still protect others. They are still fighting. I may have failed everyone, and who said I'll live through battling Eisen? Ichigo roared, Bankai. Tensao Zangetsu. His dark Ryatsu flooded the area, smothering everything around him as he entered Bankai. When the Ryatsu cleared away from him, Ichigo's Bankai looked exactly the same, except his coat was white and his hollow sword was still on his hip. It ends here, Shur. In an instant, Ichigo was gone from Shur's vision. He appeared right in front of the Dark Oni, his sword impaled through its chest. What happens to a piece of flesh when darkness touches its soul? The Oni asked, its voice no longer a collection of others. Shur's skin began to revert back to a red color, and the shadows began to leave him. You become what I was. A being consumed by nothing more than destruction, but I believe you know that. The eyes that had begun to turn into a shining green were consumed again by blackness, as Shur was no longer his former self. His breathing began to slow as his strength ebbed away, not before he sent a stream of darkness at Ichigo's shoulder. Not expecting it, Ichigo threw it square on, but there was no pain, and before he could ask anything, Shur muttered his last words. I, Ami, am shadow and death. The multiple voices faded as quickly as they'd come back as Shur's body disappeared into black spirit particles. Ichigo touched his shoulder where the mass of darkness had hit it. It didn't feel sore, nor did it bleed. The only difference about it was that it was icily cold. What did it do? We're unsure. Nothing has changed, but we'll tell you if it does. Ichigo? Chia called from the gravesite. Yeah? He said, walking around the rocks and towards her. You okay? I mean the replicas, she trailed off. Yeah, it's okay. It just takes time. Time that I probably won't have. As he talked, he touched the blue hairpin he'd clipped onto his shahakusho and glanced at the one Chia had placed in her hair. Don't say that, you idiot, she said, punching him in the icy cold shoulder. With an attitude like that you will die. Wait, what's wrong with your arm? It's like what happened when one of the shadows hit me in the leg. Nothing appeared, yet it felt cold. I don't know, the guys are keeping an eye on it, Ichigo said, gently pushing her away. Knowing it was time to go, Chia bounced to the stairs, dropping the barrier when she got there. Ichigo took one last glance at the training arena that was now empty save for the usual rocks that occupied it. The room was where it had officially begun for him, and it seemed it was the last place he'd see. Memories were echoed in this room, ones that were mainly too painful for him to look upon. But one stood out, one he'd always remember Urahara for. He was sat at the bottom of a huge hole. He was in soul form, and his arms were bound behind his back. A chain fell from the center of his chest. Tazai sat in front of him, his eyes closed in focus. "May I have your attention, please?" Urahara's voice called from above. "You have a period of 72 hours at the bottom of Shattered Shaft, Ichigo. That is how long it will take for the chain of fate to completely encroach. By the end of that time, if you have not become a Soul Reaper, Ichigo, we shall have no choice but to kill you, you bastard!" The old Ichigo had roared, upset with Urahara's methods to regain his powers. "So you intend to kill me?" "That's right, I do," replied the green-hatted Urahara, a smirk on his face. The whole air in the town was nostalgic. It was brimmed with memories for Ichigo. Memories that seemed a lifetime away. "You ready?" An airy voice brought Ichigo back from his reminiscing. "Yes, it's time." "Your barriers ready?" he said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "The explosive ones will be done by the time we get there." She smiled. "They require a certain knack so they don't go off before their time." They left the shop. The one that looked the same as ever, apart from the doors that hung on their hinges. It had been a somewhat base of operations whenever a new enemy appeared, or a place for Shinigami to stay like Rinji had frequently. It had bristled with so much life back then, and now it had the aura of a haunted house. Shiro had already gone of taunting the Onis, and he did so even if he was uneasy about it all. "Come on, Ichigo, when I said we've got to go. We have got to go." Chie grabbed his arm and began dragging him away. "Shirio's already taken many of them away, and I don't think he'll last long away from you." "I know, it's just in the end I couldn't do anything. I couldn't protect anyone." There was meaning behind his words, but his voice was a monotone. Too much was at stake now for his emotions to get in the way. He still had a chance to save the others. "Don't worry, Ichigo, they're all with you now," Chie soothed, jumping into the air using a barrier to raise Ichigo with her. "Come on, we best get there soon." They made their way silently under the battles that was raging in the sky. No one saw them. No one even glanced in their direction. Many of the battles were 2-on-1, but everyone was managing to hold their own. Ichigo dared not look too closely at the battles in fear that he may see someone else go down. The only battle he looked at was his father's, but even that was a passing glance. His dad was fighting near Eisen, so Ichigo couldn't help but look over. The old Soul Reaper was taking on 3 Oni at once. He was covered in cuts from previous battles, but they didn't seem to hinder him. Thankfully, the Oni he was fighting weren't all that strong. 2 were of lieutenant level, while the other was just above captain. Ichigo glanced long enough to see Dad take one down with a strike through the heart. With that, he continued on towards the smug figure that was Eisen. The man stood in what could be described as the middle of the battle. A smile was plastered across his face that was the same as it had been before he'd fused with the Hogyoku. Said item was still embedded in Aizen's chest in all its sparkling purely green glory. The one thing Ichigo noticed was that the Hogyoku didn't appear to be giving Eisen any power. "Eisen!" Ichigo roared, charging at his sworn enemy. "My, isn't it Ichigo Kurosaki? I thought you were too far gone to be of any threat," Eisen said lazily. He turned to a few Oni that were milling around them. "Battle him." They charged, but Ichigo and Chie were ready. In an instant, Chie raised the barrier around them and Eisen. No one was interrupting. The Oni who attacked the barrier exploded into showers of blood and gore. "I never knew they could do that." Ichigo raised an eyebrow at Chie. "They don't always. I just modified them a bit. Anyway, those guys were weak," she said, drawing her Zanpakuto. "We best attack now." "Yes." Ichigo agreed. He was already in his Bankai, so there was no time wasted on the transformation. Both he and Chie charged at the same time, knowing he could block only one of the strikes. "Heido number 31 Shikaho." Eisen called, firing it at Chie while bringing his Zanpakuto round to deflect Ichigo's strike. Pushing Ichigo back, Eisen disappeared and reappeared beside Chie, thinking she would be too slow to react. He was wrong. In an instant, Chie had brought her Zanpakuto up in defense, and proceeded to kick Eisen in the stomach, sending him flying into the barrier. The barrier burned at the skin on his back, making Eisen scream in pain. He quickly recovered and pushed away from the wall of fire, anger stark on his face. In a flash, he was next to the unsuspecting Chie, as he intended to bring his blade across her chest. Chie managed to block some of the damage, but a deep cut had found its way onto her stomach. Blood poured from the wound as she attempted to counter, only to have Ichigo appear before her. The orange-haired boy launched a big Getsuga Tensho without uttering a word. Having an idea, Chie quickly recovered and appeared behind Eisen, who was barely blocking the mass of Ichigo's Ryatsu. "Zero," was all Chie whispered before a giant mass of purple light engulfed Eisen. Believing it was over, Chie sonidoed over to Ichigo. What a mistake that was. Eisen, who had barely managed to flash step out of the way, appeared before her and stabbed her right through the chest. "Chia!" Ichigo cried. He wouldn't let someone else be taken away by Eisen. He knew the wound wouldn't be fatal if Chia could get into her resurrection, and that he intended to make happen. Using his new hollow powers, Ichigo sonitoed right at Eisen, bringing Zangetsu around and into Aizen's left side. The blow swept Eisen away and left a significant gash in the traitor's side. "Are you okay?" he asked without thinking. "Better than being dead, I guess." She coughed, her airy voice broken and blood-filled. "You best go into resurrection. You know we heal quicker like that," he said, passing her Zanpakuto to her. "Best stand back." She heaved herself up. Ichigo moved back a few meters as he heard her yell, "Strike!" Culebra! A brilliant purple light surrounded Chia as her figure changed. Silver dragon-like wings grew out her back and black claws formed on her hands and feet. Her half-mask was now mirrored on the other side of her face, and the rest of her skin was back to shining silver scales. She rolled her eyes behind her mask and the giant wings shrunk back into her back, only to be replaced by flowing silver scarf. The tips of the claws that she had were coated in a violent purple poison, while her mask emitted purple smoke from the mouth. "Well, I quite like it," she grinned, her airy voice now a low rumble of power. "I'm back, Kingy!" "Whoa, look at that resurrection. Now you can join in too," the overexcited Erenka called. "Thank you, Shrio. Glare! Luna Nueva!" Ichigo roared as black and red twisted Ryatsu surrounded him. The Ryatsu cleared from around Ichigo, revealing his resurrection. He'd kept the long orange hair which cascaded down from two forwards-facing horns. There was no full mask covering Ichigo's pale white face. Only sharp black teeth formed over his mouth, extending to just under his cheekbone into plain white bone that reached up to the horns. The top of his Bankai outfit had extended black markings which extended out from the hole in his chest. Retractable claws extended from his toes and hands. A final touch was black chains that hung from his wrists and ankles, making no sound when they moved. "Woo! How nice it is to be out and about." "Wait, what's that?" "It looks like whatever it is Shur was talking about has decided to appear." "Don't worry, King will hold it back for the battle." "Careful, guys, we're still not sure what it does." "You're telling us to be careful?" "Man, the number of times you've died." "Just hurry, Ichigo, it becomes more volatile by the second." "What a nice place it is here, I think I might stay." "Oh. Company. Get lost." After that the mental link was cut off. Ichigo wanted to help them, but there was another matter at hand that refused to wait. "So you have a resurrection," Eisen mused. "I guess that would make sense. You were a hollow after all." "I don't care for your musings, Eisen. This needs to end now." Ichigo's semi-distorted voice roared. "Why? Because you want to save them? Who is left for you to save?" Eisen paused. "Your father? That shopkeeper and his cat? The only two friends you have left? Or the remaining Shinigami?" "All of them. I will protect what is left. Even if I have to go down with you," Ichigo answered as Chie took up her position behind their target. "But what if you survive? Do you think they will forgive you?" Eisen taunted, a smile creeping onto his face. "I don't expect them to." Ichigo nodded to Chie. It was the signal to attack, and she did. In a flash she was right behind Eisen. The silver scarf was now twin blades which were poised forwards ready to impale. Black fire brimmed from her mouth, ready to turn Eisen to ashes, and her poisoned claws dripped with killer intent. She launched it all at once, believing Eisen had no idea she was there. Her momentum was too strong, and she had no time to turn to where Eisen had moved. He used this to his advantage. "Hado number 90 Kuro Hitsuji." Eisen murmured, and instantly a black box surrounded Chie. The outer lining of the box flared out, and the dispelled quickly, leaving Chie covered in cuts that were gushing blood. "It seems I can still not quite master it," Eisen sighed, looking at the fallen form of Chie. "You bastard!" Ichigo growled, turning to Chie. "Chie, can you keep the barrier up?" "There will be no need." She coughed as explosions echoed everywhere, killing many of the Oni that were left. "Your friends shall deal with the remaining two." Nodding, Ichigo turned back to Eisen, charging a Siro between his horns. It felt much like a Getsuga Tensho, only small and filled with more energy. He let the blast loose on Eisen and soindoed behind him to deal another attack. When he brought his blade down, he hit a barrier, the one that stopped sneak attacks. Ichigo could have kicked himself. How could he have forgotten? Having an idea, Ichigo charged quick Siro just as Eisen turned around and sent it blasting towards him. Most of it was deflected by the traitor's sword, but some had managed to scorch Aizen's arms, burning away much of the Shihakusho's sleeves. While Ichigo was recoiling from the multiple Siros, Eisen came at him with his sword raised. Ichigo caught the blade with his bare white hand and tugged Eisen forwards in preparation for another attack. Ichigo brought the sword down, slicing downwards through Aizen's chest, an almost fatal wound. Even with the Hogyoku rejecting him, the former captain still retained some healing ability, even if it was slow. The wound Ichigo had inflicted began to knit together slowly as the two continued at each other. Eisen was purely on the defensive until his wound healed, but Ichigo wouldn't let that happen. If he could get the right shot, and he could try to slice right through the Hogyoku, which should destroy Eisen too. Kicking Eisen back, Ichigo used one of the new techniques, Perforation Luna **. Ichigo yelled. The chains around his ankles and wrists unraveled themselves and began to float upwards. The chains morphed into small white crescent blades that were coated in black ryatsu. Using his mind, Ichigo willed the blades towards Aizen's chests. Two of the blades were deflected by Eisen, while one got him in the leg and the other hit its target, the Hogyoku. His face twisted into rage. Eisen threw Kyoka Sujetsu at Ichigo, determined to take Ichigo down with him. The blade hit Ichigo in the stomach, going right through, barely avoiding his spinal cord. He hit what would be floor, but Chie's barrier kept him from falling to the ground. A hand wrapped itself around his shoulder. It was Chie. She appeared to be fine. Her earlier wounds were healing, but the bleeding had stopped. Regardless of their victory, her eyes were filled with despair. I have a feeling we won't survive. You should say goodbye. She indicated her head to Aizen's brightly glowing form and then to all the people who stood watching. The crowd was made up of his dad, Yuryu, Ryukin, Shad, Urahara, Yoruichi, Suifong, Byakuya, Kenpachi, Toshiro, Ranjaku, Omida, Hisejai, and Ichira. They all looked happy to see him, but their eyes held the same sadness that Chie's did. Guys. Ichigo trailed off, not knowing what to say. My son, I am proud of you. His dad was cut off by Chie and a noise of building pressure. Ichigo. You have only a few seconds. Chie screamed as she glanced over her shoulder. I guess this is goodbye. Distorted sorrow-filled words left Ichigo in a bloody cough. I'm sorry about everything. I wish this never happened. He never got to finish. The bright light expanded in a huge explosion that pushed forwards at Ichigo and Chie. Both Erankars wished that none of this ever happened, that they never consumed anyone, but most of all Ichigo wished that he could have stopped Eisen before any of this happened. As those thoughts filled through their minds, the hairpins they wore began to glow a warm orange as they formed a shield around Ichigo and Chie. When the blast with the Hogyoku connected with the shield, it listened to the desires. With the force of an explosion that would have leveled Katakura town, Ichigo and Chie were thrown back. Everything was a blur, but soon the world around them stabilized as a familiar hill came into existence. The hill where it had all begun. Chie and Ichigo were deposited in a pile that was mainly coated in blood. After much noise, the two untangled themselves and got up. They looked around, confused what was happening. After all, they should be dead, shouldn't they? What they saw didn't instill any confidence in Chie, who'd always learned to fear Shinigami. Right in front of them stood the head captain along with a few other captains and their lieutenants. All of them eyed them with suspicion, their zanpakutos drawn. Ichigo was at a loss. Where the hell are we? Chie roared at him, losing her cool demeanor. I'll give you a guess. I'd rather not try. I don't want to believe we're here. She paused. We should be dead. You know the giant explosion when we killed that Eisen guy? I know, but from the looks of it, Ichigo was cut off by a familiar cry that almost made him laugh. Ichigo? Rukia yelled from atop her execution stand, uncertain as to if the long-hair orange person was Ichigo. Seems like we're back in time. He trailed off into a fit that involved coughing up blood and collapsed to the ground. Oh no you don't, Chie muttered, catching him, wincing from her cuts as she did so. You're staying upright until you tell me where we are. I demand you tell us who you are, now. A cold stoic noble said to them. Wait, Chie squinted her eyes, trying to pinpoint when she last saw the familiar man. Weren't you just covered in blood after fighting Oni? Nobody had a chance to respond because the body she was holding began to erupt into a mass of swirling shadows that left everyone feeling cold. It's nice to come out and play. Multiple voices called from the blackened form of Ichigo. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow BaltasaraDutra for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.